Good evening, everybody. Seeing that we have quorum, I'll call this meeting to order. And our first order of business is a public meeting. And I will just read the gospel that I read every time before a public meeting. Notice of collection. Personal information collected as a result of this public hearing and on the forms provided at the back of the room is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning and Development. The purpose of public meetings is to present planning applications in a public forum as required by the Planning Act. Following presentations by the applicant, committee members will be afforded an opportunity to ask questions for clarification or further information. The meeting will then be open to the public for comments and questions. Interested persons are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. There is also a sign-in sheet for interested members of the public at the back of the room. No decisions are made at public meetings concerning applications unless otherwise noted. The public meeting is held to gather public opinion. An exception to this rule is combined reports, which consolidates the public meeting and the comprehensive reports. These applications are deemed by staff as straightforward and routine. This business practice has been in place for a number of years and is received by the applicants as efficient customer service and effective use of committee time. Please note that staff use discretion in determining if an application can be a combined public meeting comprehensive report to expedite the approval process. Public meeting reports are provided to inform the public of all relevant information. Information gathered is then referred back to planning and development staff for the preparation of a comprehensive report and recommendation to planning committee. This means that after the meeting tonight, staff will be considering the comments made by the public in their further review of the applications. When this review is completed, a report will be prepared making a recommendation for action to this committee. The recommendation is typically to approve with conditions or to deny. This committee then makes a recommendation on the applications to City Council. City Council has the final say on the applications from the city's perspective. Following council decision, notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the council or the corporation of the City of Kingston to the local planning appeal tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. Thank you. So our first order of business tonight is file number D35-004-2018 in regards to the Rideau Heights area. So, there you are, snuck up on me. The floor is yours.
Good evening. All right. Members of the Planning Committee, staff, and members of the public, my name is Yuko Leclerc. I'm a land use planner with Foten Consultants. It's my pleasure this evening to present applications for draft plan of subdivision, official plan amendment, and zoning bylaw amendment for the lands known as the Headway Block. These applications are made on behalf of the City of Kingston's Housing and Social Services Department and the Kingston and Frontenac Housing Corporation. So our subject lands are located in Rideau Heights. They're north of Weller Avenue and west of Wilson Street, kind of between Montreal and Division Street. They're in an area that's predominantly residential, and I'm going to rely heavily on my mouse to identify areas on the site this evening, just because I don't have a laser pointer. So our site is surrounded by mostly residential uses, but there are a number of community parks in the vicinity. Shannon Park to the east and Markers Acres to the north, another park down further southeast. Neighborhoods to the north and south are predominantly residential. To the west, it transitions to a more commercial type of use. There's some more higher density residential, some mid-rise apartment buildings, and then a community facility, the Kingston Community Health Center building, just at the corner of Compton and Weller. And then further to the west is the commercial developments on Division Street. A subject site currently includes a variety of land uses. All of the residential uses on the site are currently townhouses, and they're owned by Kingston Frontenac Housing Corporation, KFHC. And you can see them here. There's on the north side of Compton Street, kind of inside the elbow of Compton Street, at the corner of Weller and Compton, and then at Wilson and Compton. The lands also include the former Oakwood Daycare, the Headway Park, and then a fire lane that kind of runs through the property between Compton and Wilson Street. Ownership of the lands is kind of split between the city and KFHC. All of the townhouse blocks are owned by KFHC, and those other lands are owned by the city of Kingston. So the former Oakwood Daycare, the park itself, the fire lane, the Salvation Army Church. It's actually on a parcel that is the kind of the rear half, the vacant portion of that parcel is included in the subject lands, but the church itself is not. I'll also note here that we've kind of developed we're using these names actually that have been developed for the Rideau Heights Regeneration Strategy as a shorthand for the different areas. So the North Compton block being all of the lands north of Compton Street, the Compton block, the Compton and Wilson block, and the Compton and Weller block. That'll come up a little bit more when I'm explaining kind of the concept on the lands and the plan changes. I'll also note here that there are a lot of civic addresses associated with the lands being developed, and those are all listed in the staff report. It's a long list. I'm not going to list them here, but I have that available if there are any questions about it. So looking at the land's current designation under the official plan, so all of the residential portions of the land and the rear half of that, or the rear portion of that church property, are designated residential. The residential designation allows all of those uses. And then the park and the fire lane are designated open space. So the open space designation allows community parks, community facilities, natural reserves, and things like that, but it does not allow residential uses. The current zoning on the site is also largely site-specific for all of the residential, for all of the residential lands, and the former daycare. It's a site-specific zone that was designed back when the lands was originally developed in the 1970s. It's very prescriptive. It's very specific to what's there now. It allows a total of 246 residential units on these lands. So it allows what's there. There's no opportunity or flexibility to more efficiently use the existing area. There's a few other zones that are included in the lands. That back portion of the Salvation Army Church property is zoned A5. It's a 1 and 2 family dwelling zone. It allows other community facilities like the church. And then the park and the fire lane are both zoned P, which is a general recreation zone, which allows the park and community facility uses. So the reason that we're here this evening with these land use planning applications is because City Council approved the Rideau Heights Regeneration Strategy a number of years ago. This is a long-term strategy. It's a 25-year strategy to help revitalize and regenerate Rideau Heights in phases. The lands that we're looking at right now are phase 2 of the strategy. And the plan that was originally approved by Council is what we're showing on the slide here. So you can see that the goal at a very high level is to reduce the concentration of RGI, that's rent geared to income housing in this area. So it's to diversify the type of housing that's there now, introducing other types of affordable housing, 80% market housing, as well as market housing units. The goal of the strategy is also to increase the total number of residential units. There's a lot of land here. There's opportunity to intensify it, to more efficiently use it for residential uses and convert some of the blocks a little bit. So right now, a lot of the blocks face onto other houses and things like that. So one of the goals of the strategy was to create laneways throughout the neighborhood. So I'm gonna use my mouse again. So the strategy envisioned laneways like along the edge of Headway Park, passing through the blocks here, just to create a bit more of an eyes on the street feel. It's a community safety thing. It also provides opportunities for curbside solid waste collection, so that so solid waste isn't piled in co-collection points, so that each house can have its own garbage collected, recycling and green bins collected at the curb. Those are generally the high-level goals of this strategy. So that strategy did undergo a little bit of changes with council, went back and forth a little bit, and the concept plan that we're looking at tonight is kind of the continued evolution of that concept. So we've looked at the strategies that were developed and have kind of worked with city staff to refine some of the details for technical matters and things like that. So I'm going to walk you through very quickly through these blocks and what's proposed for the development. So this is the ultimate vision. This is what's proposed for the lands that's to be implemented through the planning applications. So on the North Compton block, generally speaking, the townhouses are intended to remain as they are. But on the old daycare property, it's proposed to add a 4-story apartment building and some townhouses with attached garages along the north side of Compton. There would be some units renovated as much as possible. That's an important aspect of the strategy is to use the existing housing stock and renovate as much as physically possible. Some units will have to be demolished in order to accommodate some of the changes, but the goal is to minimize that and maximize what can be reused. So that's the North Compton block. On the Compton block here, the goal is to add a laneway on the kind of between the block and Headway Park, another laneway through the middle, so that all of the housing stock here would front onto a laneway or a public road. You can kind of see on my plan here, I'm losing my mouse, that the housing in that kind of purplish gray color, that's existing housing stock that's to be renovated. The housing in that kind of peachy color, that's new housing. So one of the goals here is to add townhouses, whether it's adding them to the ends of existing townhouse blocks or adding new blocks of townhouses where feasible. Moving all of the parking internal to the lots, to the blocks rather. So that's the plan for Compton block. Not a lot of change in housing stock in that location. It's just, it'll remain generally townhouses. Similarly, on the Compton and Wilson block, adding a laneway between Compton and Wilson Street, adding a sort of a little bit of a laneway leading to parking on the inside on the south side there. And again, generally maintaining the housing stock, existing townhouses, adding townhouses, but the character of that block will remain townhouses. I'll note here that there's a few townhouses here that it's just not feasible or practical to add a laneway for those townhouses, so they would have to remain in that kind of configuration, unfortunately. You can see here from that previous slide I was showing the strategy, the existing fire lane was originally intended to be a road, converted to a road. That's still the case, but that road is going to be straightened out. That allows for a more efficient use of the land. It also allows the preservation of this whole row of houses here on the Compton and Wilson block. That road would be converted to a public street with street trees, street lighting, sidewalk, curb, and it would be given a street name, that kind of thing. On the south side here is where the most significant change is going to happen. A new apartment building, a 4-story apartment building, would be located at the corner of the new street and Compton Street. It would be a residential building, up to 49 residential units. The intent here is to provide a little bit of flexibility on the ground floor through the zoning, allow some neighborhood commercial uses, very small scale uses, possibly for a nonprofit organization to set up an office or a convenience store, really that kind of small scale serving the immediate area. And it's really just to provide that flexibility. There aren't any immediate plans to put that type of use in that building, but by allowing that in the zoning, we won't be in a situation in the future where if there's interest in doing that, they're having to come back for another zoning amendment. A new laneway would be built here connecting Weller Avenue to the public road. The housing stock along that new laneway, these here, those are intended to be attached triplexes. So a little bit more efficient than a standard townhouse. It would basically be 3 stacked units, a triplex and attached, so kind of a triplex and a townhouse form. Across the laneway from that, a similar built form would be, back-to-back townhouses and also stacked. So we're talking units that are separated vertically and also horizontally. There would be no rear yards for each of those units, but each of them would have a front yard fronting onto a street or a private laneway. So that's, generally speaking, that's the plan. That's what's envisioned as part of this development. You'll note I haven't talked about Headway Park. That's because the future programming of that park will happen at a later date. That's something that'll happen down the road through consultation with the community. I'm illustrating here kind of a summary of the previous slide. And what I want to get at here is that currently there's 246 residential units, all rent geared to income in the subject area, in the Headway block. You'll see that as many as possible, 233 of those would be renovated. 13 of them will have to be demolished on this concept plan. And then another 95 new units and new housing forms would be introduced into the neighborhood, raising the overall number of units to 428. What I'm showing here again is that change in unit composition. So right now on the left, the pie chart is showing 246. It's all rent geared to income, but the future mix is going to be a little bit more diverse. There's going to be, less than 50% of the total housing stock will be rent geared to income. Less than 50% will be affordable housing, and then a small number will also be market housing. So there's going to be a real variety of housing options in the neighborhood. A total of 54 rent-geared income units are planned to be removed from this area and located elsewhere in the city of Kingston. That's part of the strategy and part of the goal of reducing the concentration of rent-geared income units and providing a little bit more diversity in the income composition in this neighborhood. So in order to achieve this, there are a number of planning applications that have to happen. So the three that I'm going to talk about tonight are the draft plan of subdivision, the official plan amendment, and the zoning bylaw amendment. There will be future planning applications that have to happen. The draft plan of subdivision will have to go through final plan of subdivision, which is a technical exercise. Each of these blocks, when they're developed in the future, will have to go through a more detailed technical exercise through site plan control, where their individual servicing and design needs will be looked at and examined in consultation with the city to work out any of those details that are not addressed through at this stage of development. So the draft plan of subdivision does foresee a little bit of change in the existing lot fabric. You'll note at first, I think the first thing you'll see is that the North Compton block is not included in the draft plan. That's because there are two parcels there. There's no change proposed there. That's intended to remain as two parcels. Now, if that changes through the technical review with the city, that'll obviously that'll be brought to the committee's attention and brought to the public's attention. But at this time, there is no change planned in that area. The Compton block is generally planned to remain more or less the same. It will be necessary to shave a little bit of land off of the Headway Park to accommodate the laneway so that the entire laneway can be located on that block rather than straddling a property line. Similarly, on the east side at the corner of Wilson and Compton, that property line will again generally remain the same. There will be a little bit of shaving off of the parkland as well, so that the entire easement, there is a power easement there, can be located on that residential block. The fire lane will be straightened out and developed as a municipal road. So that's what's shown here. This is a public road allowance. You can see that on the east side it'll be a little bit wider. That's just because of the way the fire lane is currently configured. Leaving it in that way, it provides an opportunity for those townhouses to have a little bit more boulevard in front of between the houses and the road. Once again, the more significant changes are going to be on the south, where the goal is to have the apartment building and the stacked townhouses on separate blocks, on their own individual blocks, and then have the laneway, the north-south laneway, kind of divide the two sets of townhouse blocks. This is, in some ways, this is a servicing matter. It provides an opportunity to advance each of these blocks a little bit more flexibly in the future from a servicing perspective. Each block can only have one set of services. And by dividing the land in this way, when the blocks come up when it's their turn effectively to be redeveloped in the future, it'll be possible to do site plan and develop one block at a time and allow it to be serviced appropriately. So this is really about helping to implement that phasing of redevelopment throughout the community. I'll note here that a portion of that Salvation Army property, or it's owned by the city, but it's the same parcel of land as the church, is to be included in that block there with the stacked townhouses. From an official plan perspective, we are asking for an official plan amendment. We're asking to change the fire lane from a open space designation to a residential designation so that the apartment building and the stacked townhouses can be built. Because right now, the way that they're situated, that we're planned to be situated, they're within that open space designation. Since we're asking for a zoning bylaw amendment to allow those uses, we have to change the official plan to also implement that, to allow those lands to be rezoned for residential use. So that's the goal of the official plan amendment that's associated with this project. It's all about changing the designation on that laneway. In terms of the zoning that's proposed, right now I was showing you before that there's some site-specific zoning on the site, so we're asking to rezone and apply 2 site-specific zones. So the lands on the north side of Compton Street, that North Compton block, would be subject to 1 zone, and then the rest of the lands on the south of Compton Street would be subject to a separate zone. Generally speaking, the main difference between the two is that on the North Compton block, we're proposing to set a maximum height. Currently, the height maximum is set by the yard setbacks. So if you build your building further away from the lot line, you can go taller. We're just suggesting to add a height limit, 4 stories, no higher than that, to accommodate the proposed apartment building and allow it to be located closer to where it's shown. The building right to the side there is a utility Kingston substation. So by allowing that apartment building to be a little bit closer there, it's not anticipated that it's going to have any kind of intrusive overlook or anything like that on another neighboring property. We're also proposing to change the parking ratios. That's across the board on all of the residential lands. The current requirement is 1 space per unit. We're asking to bring that down to 0.7 spaces per unit. This is in line with the overall vision, part of the strategy. It's also we had a parking study done that showed that the actual usage of parking in the area is actually very, very low. So by reducing the parking ratio, we're not oversupplying parking. We're not providing empty parking lots. The parking spaces that are there will be used by the residents, and they'll serve the residents and potentially their visitors. The general lands as well, one of the changes that we're suggesting there is to allow that commercial use, that non-residential use at a neighborhood scale in that apartment building. So that's one of the differences between the 2 zones. We're not proposing anything like that on the north side of Compton Street. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to go with different zones. Generally, the zoning is about recognizing the existing townhouse setbacks and allowing new setbacks, new front yard setbacks for some of the new buildings, particularly on this new road. Where we're creating a new road, there's an opportunity to establish what the new streetscape will be. So we're proposing a zone that allows, that recognizes that built form and that reduced setback. It is lower than what's currently allowed in the zoning. The idea being that it'll allow the buildings to have a really close relationship with the street. There's still lots of room for amenity area on the site, on the lands in general, as well with given their proximity to Headway Park. I can get into more specifics on the zoning. We're also asking to increase the density. I think that's an important point to make. Currently, the limit is 246 units per net hectare. We're asking to set a ratio that represents the maximum number of units that's proposed, that 428 units that I was talking about a moment ago. So that summarizes my presentation. I think it's our opinion that these applications, the draft plan to subdivision, official plan amendment, and zoning bylaw amendment conform to the policies of they're consistent with the provincial policy statement, and they conform to the policies of the official plan, and that this plan will help to implement phase 2 of the Rideau Heights regeneration strategy. Through you, Mr. Chair, if there's any questions or comments, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. I appreciate it. If we could have a comment from one of the planners, that'd be great.
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Chair, the application was noticed per the requirements of the Act. As you can tell, there's a substantial amount of parcel and property that's subject to these applications. So there was actually 13 signs that were posted in the area to notify of tonight's meeting. The mailouts included 130 properties in the surrounding area, as well as advertisements placed in the local newspaper. And to date, I have received 0 pieces of public correspondence as it relates to tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now turn to, are there any questions or comments? Yes, Councillor Hutchison and then Councillor Kyler.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to get something straightened out that's not clear to me anyway. On page 5, you talk about renovating 233 existing townhouses, right? And constructing 192 new residential units. You add that together and you get 425 units. You're demolishing 13. That gives you 412. But you're saying that you'll get a total of 428 residential dwelling units. I don't understand how you get there. Seem to be 16 units short.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if there's the numbers that I've got on my screen right here, these are the numbers that are proposed. So it's 200. The goal is to renovate 233 townhouse units, demolish 13 of the existing 246 units,
Sure.
and then construct these additional units: 98 apartment, 41 new townhouse units, 24 attached triplex units, and 32 stacked townhouse units.
Right, and that comes up next on the bottom of page 5.
And that should add up to 428. If there's a numerical error, we can certainly correct that, but this is the number that's envisioned.
Okay, because it doesn't add up on the bottom of page 5 either. So based on what we're told here, but perhaps it's the way it's being presented, it talks about 306 KFHC-owned units and 122 market units, which I have a question about in a minute, for a total of 428 units. Okay, fair enough. But then it says, in the form of 98 apartment units, 24 triplex units, 32 townhouse, 41 new townhouse. But that adds up to 195. So it got a bit confusing reading this, what exactly was happening. I'm just looking for an explanation. I mean, I could start analyzing that, I guess, but I don't have that. So I'm just going by what I've got.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this table is in our planning report, in our planning rationale that was submitted with the application. We'll work with staff to make sure that that number is clarified before it comes back to this committee.
Okay. Just so you know that what's written here doesn't add up to 428 in either case, okay? So, other questions?
Sorry, just a point. Both the clerk and I just did the math, and it comes up to 428.
No, it doesn't.
If you ignore the units demolished and don't have
I'm
them.
not talking about that. I'm talking about the report. The report is what we had. We didn't.
I thought you were talking about the chart.
Nope.
My apologies.
Okay. So the other thing, the first question I have is, aside from the differentiation between units and market units, what is the proposed income mix? It talks about units, which doesn't really describe them in any other way. Then it talks about market units. And while we're on to that, I would like to know who owns the market units. Who's the final owner of the market units? It may not matter to me. I just want to know.
Certainly.
One way or the other.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The reason I've been I haven't gone into that level of details because some of those details are still being worked out.
Sure.
Generally speaking, this slide illustrates the breakdown in the number of kind of the composition of affordability. So
Sure.
192 rent geared to income units, 179 units that are affordable and market, owned by KFHC, certainly, and then 57 units that are in the strategy slated to be private market units. Now, whether or not they actually end up being private market units is not something that I can speak to tonight, but it's
yet to be determined.
That's correct.
Okay, that's fine. We don't have that either, so it's hard to tell. So, okay, that's what generally I think we passed as council in general terms, so I'm fine. Just no longer commissioner. The acting CAO is something.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may. So I think what we wanted to make sure, as far as the ownership is concerned, I think that's the piece we haven't yet identified, but what we wanted to make sure the committee understood was that we were looking at private market units as well, because we do need a mixture in that neighborhood. So we wanted to make sure that the committee was aware that we weren't necessarily just contemplating building more affordable housing in a neighborhood that is oversaturated with affordable housing already.
And I'm totally in agreement with that. That's in what well, there's been a number of reports, right? And I just thought there would be something in here that would tell us, that remind us what it goes. But you haven't figured it all out, that's fine. But we will know at some point, I take it. So one other, I had a question about density, but that's answered in here. And just a second. Sorry about this. When you can write on it, you don't have this problem. Okay, so at the end it says financial considerations, and there's nothing there. So I have a question about that, because we have in strategic planning a proposed building 90 affordable housing units. Question is that 90 included here, or is it additional to this? This has been in planning for, what, 3 years or something? And I'm not complaining about that, because I know how long it takes. But I would like to know, are these two going to be presented as overlapping, or are they two separate proposals? You wouldn't know the answer to this. My question is directed over there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the $18 million that council has asked us to identify for affordable housing, and we are getting there, moving a lot of stuff around. So that 18 million could be potentially utilized for some of these properties, but these may not be ready in time for the use of the money. I'm sure you would like, council would like to see the money used during this term of council. So what's in the budget is the process, all of the planning studies, everything that need to be done for the planning of this, the phase 2, if you wish. We don't necessarily have money in the budget for all the units that will be built or will be required to be built, because that's something we'll have to work through with KFHC. The $18 million, I think we would want to contemplate a property that may be more readily available and ready for development, something like 1316 Princess Street that we've had, for example, for a number of years now, that could accommodate those affordable housing units.
Okay, I follow that completely, but I'll talk to someone later. Okay, thank you. Those are my main questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Kiley.
Mr. Chair, through you, I have a park space. If we could talk about the size. From my reading of the report, it seems like the park space will be halved. It will be cut in half because we'll be making the fire lane, which is currently included in the park space, a road. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. Currently, the parkland, that number includes the fire lane. So if I'm just going to, through you, Mr. Chair, I'll just take you back to this original slide here. So the land that's included in the parkland, actually this is probably a more effective one, is basically all of this blue. It kind of juts around here, around that property where the church is located is not included in the parkland number, but the rest of it, the park itself and the entire width of that fire lane is. So when the report talks about the reduction in the area of parkland, that's what it's referencing, is the removal of that fire lane from the parkland. There are some slight changes to the property lines, so the western and eastern boundaries of Headway Park are going to shift a little bit as well. But those are fairly minor, and they're shown on the schedule that staff prepared, identifying kind of the amount of that needs to be shaved off.
Yeah, so the actual green space would be roughly the same.
Generally, through you, Mr. Chair, the programmable area of Headway Park will remain the same.
Excellent. Second question was about permeable material that was referenced in the report on page 44. it talked about permeable structures, permeable material. I was wondering if you could give an example of what that would be, perhaps through to staff on that one.
I'll jump in very quickly through you, Mr. Chair, and just say that I don't have a very good answer for you there. That level of detail is something that would be worked out through the future site plan applications. So at this point in time, the stormwater management report talks a bit about the use of those types of materials to reduce the stormwater runoff, but it's effectively saying this is a way that you could reduce it. That needs to be looked at in more detail when these individual properties come up for site plan. The next step effectively through this process will be the final plan of subdivision approval, which is a much more technical exercise. That stormwater management level of detail is going to be worked out more at that level, and then it'll be worked out even more detail at the site plan stage.
Yeah, that's fair. Thank you. And one further question is about front yard setbacks. It's going from 7 meters to 2.4 meters. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's correct in certain locations.
Okay.
The zoning on this is a little bit complicated, so I don't have it memorized. The general intent is that the townhouses will remain at 7 meters. They were originally zoned to have a 7.5 meter setback, but some of them were actually built a little bit closer. So we're just asking to have that amended to reflect what's actually there. A reduced setback is proposed on the new public road, so a 4 meter setback for the most part. For the apartment building, and then a 2.4 meter setback for the stacked townhouses. I believe this is how we have it broken down.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is I'm wondering about the implications of that for traffic noise, dust, any other detrimental effects of having the road that close to the house. Could you speak to that, please?
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Chair. The road won't be 2.4 meters from the property. The property line will be 2 meters, 2.4 meters from the building. The road itself will be set back in that boulevard. There will be landscaping, green space, trees along that boulevard, street lights and things like that. The traffic studies and noise studies were completed in support of this project, and neither of them identified the traffic level as being a major concern. In particular, the reduced setbacks are proposed along there's a new street where the existing fire lane is. So the level of traffic on that street is actually going to be quite low.
Good. Yeah, thank you.
And could you take the chair if you would, Vice Chair?
Yeah, take the chair with you.
Questions. Some of my questions have already been addressed. I'm glad that you're considering permeable hard surface for parking lot areas. It's not always feasible for well-traveled roadways, but it definitely should be a consideration for parking areas. I'm used to seeing in plans of subdivision ideas of pathways, shared pathways, cycling or pedestrian, and given our focus on active transportation, I'm a little curious why there doesn't seem to be within your plan any plan for, and maybe it's there and I just don't see it, but I don't see a plan for a pathway across. So we may be forcing pedestrians to take long ways around or for cyclists to use the roads instead of pathways. Could you comment on that?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. The general intent is that pedestrian, cycling, and vehicular movement throughout the site outside of the public streets occur on the laneways. So the laneways are designed to be a particular width that 2 vehicles could pass by, or a vehicle and a pedestrian and a cyclist. There's not anticipated to be a very high volume of traffic. So there's the traffic conflicts of having 2 vehicles and pedestrians and cyclists is not anticipated due to the level of activity on the site. And it's anticipated that users would look out for themselves, but the creation of the laneways linking the streets these are intended to be lit areas and have a bit more public safety than kind of the impromptu pathways that exist there now.
Yeah. Given the density here, I still think that we're missing an opportunity. If this was a private plan of subdivision, I would be very adamantly saying we need a couple of multi-use pathways so that we can keep people particularly kids on bikes, off the roadways. So I'm a little curious about the northern area that's marked totally market value, or market. Is it anticipated that these, and this may have been partially answered to Councillor Hutchison's question, but that blue area up there, is any of that going to be sold as freehold or condominiumized or anything like that, or will that be rental property, or is that even decided yet?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The strategy had envisioned, I believe, that to be private market housing, but that's, I think as was noted earlier, that's still to be determined. Those details are still not sorted out 100%, and they're not going to be addressed one way or another by the land use planning applications.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm glad that we're maintaining a presence of green space on the site. Is there a consideration or an opportunity farther away from that, but along especially the transit ways like Weller and Compton, to have to fit a parkette in at all, small parkette for pedestrians to sit on benches and that kind of thing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the detailed design of of Compton Street will be looked at through this, but it is an existing street, so opportunities to improve the street will be something that we look at with city staff. When we looked at this concept, we had noted that there were potential areas, for example, at the corner of Wilson and Compton, where there's a bit more opportunity for green space. There's no building there. It's not intended to sort of chop that off and do it as a separate parkette, but there is an opportunity there to potentially provide a little bit more outdoor amenity space, sort of supplementing what's already there through Headway Park. But it's not intended to be addressed in too much detail through these particular applications. Potentially could be looked at through the site plan control of that block.
Yeah. And I'm hopeful, because I've been kind of ranting against when developers come and ask for a variance on the secure bicycle parking provision. You still anticipate one parking space per unit. You can meet that without requesting a variance.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the plan is to meet that requirement. We've asked to provide a little bit of flexibility by reducing the width of bicycle parking stalls so that the handlebars can be overlapped. But the goal is still to meet the zoning bylaw requirement for bike parking.
Good, thank you.
You can take the chair.
Thank you. So, seeing no further questions, committee, we'll open the floor for community comments or questions. If anybody cares to, if you want to move to this microphone right here, that would be great.
You turn it. It's on? I can come. Okay. Hi, my name's Pauline McNeil. I live at 220 Wilson, Unit 2. I've been there for the past 15 years, and it's nice to see that the North End's getting some of the city's money. It's a nice area to live in. It's not where I wanted to live. I was at Bombardier, I owned a house. I was in a car accident. Now I'm in public housing on government, ODSP. It's nice to see the plans, but I think that the gentleman said something about reducing the parking on the street. Did you mention something about that? Do you want cars more in the parking lots? Did I hear that right?
That the parking would be moved interior to the blocks.
Yes. Have some consideration, though. This is a bad area. That when I park in front of my house, it's not because I choose to, but I'd rather not have my tires sliced over and over again, my windows smashed. Up on Headway Park right now, there are two, whatever's left over from two burnt-out cars up there, which the city should take care of. But it's a bad neighborhood. You can check with city police. They have canine units, SWAT teams, grenades that they shoot into units. It's bad there. So when we park in front of our units, it's so we can get in our doors safely. And that's awfully nice that you have beautiful parking lots you're going to put up. But sometimes those aren't the safest places to park there. In front of my unit, the trees are beautiful on the street, but they block out all the light from the street lights. So it's really not, you might just want to remove the street lights. So revamping it, you've got to look at the small details that the people who live there actually need. For you people who don't live there, I'm sure you look at this and say, looks great on paper, but in actuality, how are we going to live it? The paths are great. I think they're wonderful. The lane on Wilson Street, Compton area that you're hoping to put in, I think that's too close to those residents. I know it's needed and you want to put it there, but you have to look at snow removal. That's going to pile up, and all these basements take on water. So you're going to have it melting and cascading down on the south side of 210, that road. The sidewalks, whoever the engineers were who put the last set in didn't take into consideration the runoff of water, because in the winter it freezes. And I can't make it from my unit on Wilson Street to that parking lot because it's slippery and the grade is too high. The grade to the front of the road is it steeps down all over from each angle. So you have to look at the grade of the land, and that land from Wilson Street, it just ripples down. So take that into consideration. The park, that's nice, but the water park's across the street, that there will need to be some sort of crosswalk there for those kids to get from Wilson across to that water park, because when the people come in from Ottawa and Belleville playing in that soccer field, they don't realize that the kids are going to run across that street. Even though their parents might be with them, the kids will run ahead of them sometimes. So you need those crosswalks for safety. It's too bad that only 2 of us showed up from the North End. My parents built in 1963, the same as hers, on Montreal Street. So we've lived it there, and we've seen 1130. We've seen, it's like when you tear down those units on the other side, 80 Daly went down. Green Shield's got a ton of money from the city because the rats increased 95% in our area. Another thing, thanks developers. So when you make changes, it affects our lives. And these rats don't just stay on the exterior of the house. They're actually in people's units, falling on their heads while they're sleeping. So keep these things in mind, what you're doing to the North End, and hopefully it'll look nice. I'm doubting that any of these kids will ever step foot with cleats on those soccer fields, but it's nice they'll be put in for other people. Because these kids, unless you put together teams and have somebody work with these kids, and I know there's Big Brothers or whatever, something down at the Rideau Heights now, hopefully somebody will help organize so these kids do get involved, because it's hard for mom to get off at Tim Hortons to take their child to the soccer field. So keep that in mind also, that they need to be organized sports down there. And I think that as we were younger, there were baseball teams and so on, but people took care of those and encouraged children to get involved. But I want to thank you for your time, and thanks for what you're trying to do. And let's see if what you do is successful, because I'm sure people will appreciate it over the years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I failed to kind of spell out the format. Typically, the public questions are gathered and then answered by the proponent's agent or by staff. So if you wondered why there weren't immediate answers coming, it's because things will get addressed at the end.
Okay.
And for future reference, everybody has 5 minutes. So thank you very much.
I never know.
So,
Thank you very much.
any other member of the public wish to speak? Yes, go ahead.
Paul Martin, 961 Linwood Drive. The parking study, my understanding is you're reducing the amount of parking based on the study, but was the study taken into consideration that you're also looking at putting affordable and market units there? Parking is something that has already been pointed out tonight. It is important. The other thing is that I haven't seen any schematics or layouts of how these townhouses work. Is there something that you have that we just haven't seen yet? My other question would be, have you considered, I guess, high-rise in this area as opposed to stacked townhouses? Stacked townhouses obviously are not going to have an elevator, you know, more and more people are requiring accessibility. And if you go to something where you can put height, and instead of, and I'm assuming this because I haven't seen any plans of what you're looking at building, that this will all be frame. But if you're getting into high-rise, you're probably going to build out of concrete and steel, making the buildings more durable. And I just wondered, did you take these things into consideration when you were trying to put this plan together? Thank you.
Any further comments or questions from the public? Going once, going twice. Thank you very much. Did you want to address some of those concerns? And if staff have anything to add, that would be great.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll do my best. The first item that came up was the concern about safety of interior parking and the parking in front of your home for safety reasons. One of the goals of this change is to provide for safe parking, to establish principles such as eyes on the street, crime prevention through environmental design. So the creation of the laneways and the parking areas internal to the laneways with lighting and things like that. I appreciate the concern about the lights being removed from or destroyed. That I can't really speak to, but I can speak to the design and the overall intent, which is the goal is to create a safe space. On the question of snow removal, the laneways are planned to be sufficiently wide to satisfy, to allow the plows to go through and clear the lanes. The runoff of sidewalks, stormwater is a critical component to the technical engineering exercise that's happening here. There's a stormwater plan that was prepared in support of these applications at a sort of a feasibility level. That'll be looked at in much more detail at the final plan of subdivision stage and then further detailed out at the site plan stage for each individual area of the site that gets designed. One of the reasons for the conversion of the fire lane to a public street is so that it can be rebuilt to the public municipal road standard so that the fire lane, the grade of that fire lane meets the standards of the city. The crosswalk across Wilson Street, that wasn't identified through the traffic study. It's certainly something we can work with city staff on and our consultants on and have them provide comment on. On the demolition concern, I think there's, from the planning application side of things, there's not really anything that I can say to that. I think that's an important concern, and I think that's heard by the city. The second set of questions, the parking study looked at usage and projected usage for the area. So it looked a little bit, I don't know if it explicitly looked at ownership and whether an affordable versus market units. It found that ratio that was proposed at 0.7 spaces per unit would be appropriate for this neighborhood based on usage patterns. Schematics and plans. The townhouses that are proposed are effectively what's there. So no plans or schematics were prepared for those. But I'll just transition very quickly to my PowerPoint. I didn't go through these more as a matter of time. But we did prepare a number of renderings kind of identifying the way that these buildings and this built form will relate to the community. These were shown at an open house that was held last year in the community, and they were put up on big boards, and we had an opportunity for the public to look at the boards and to ask questions about the built form. What I'm showing here, this is the 4-story apartment building with the commercial at grade. This is kind of an overview of the overall area, showing the stacked
and back-to-back townhouses, the attached triplexes, the kind of the 4-story apartment building at the north end. So really, it's a massing exercise that was undertaken to show the feasibility of these uses in these areas.
And the last question had to do with examining high-rises. I can't speak to the philosophy and the overall vision of the regeneration strategy, but my understanding is that the goal is to achieve a neighborhood scale, which is why the strategy had only ever envisioned 4 or so story buildings. So we've looked at that, and that's what's proposed through these planning applications, is what was contemplated for kind of this community neighborhood scale through that strategy and council's review.
Mr. Chair, if I can maybe just add a comment related to parking. I just want to clarify that when we do review for parking, we never look at income as the driving factor in deciding whether or not there should be more or less parking. We treat individuals that reside in the neighborhood the same way. We don't make the difference between the income levels, and I think that's very important that we do that. What we do look at, obviously, is some of our goals in terms of active transportation and transit, so we do take those into consideration when we're looking at reducing the number of parking, but that has nothing to do with the income levels, and I just want to clarify that.
Thank you for that clarification. Seeing no other staff making eye contact, I think we're ready to go back to the committee for any comments or concerning this. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Through you to Jeremy, picking up on Acting CAO Hurdle's comment about active transportation and public transit. Could you please point out where the bus stops are in this area and how they relate to the new, especially larger buildings? So essentially, what's the proximity of public transit to the proposed development?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I couldn't tell you exactly where the bus stops are. I can tell you that there are 3 bus routes that run through Compton Street, and then there's express bus routes within 600 meters to the west on Division Street, and I think there are about 600 meters or so on Montreal Street. The individual locations of bus stops, I think we can identify that on a future plan, certainly.
That'd be.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, we can ensure that that information is included in the comprehensive report before the committee makes a decision.
Thank you. And then question through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, picking up on the residents' comments about rats and other pests. I'm wondering if there has been consideration of that in this process, and if staff could elucidate that a bit for us, because I'd like to hear more.
That might be more of a question to staff than. There you
Maybe
go.
if I could, Mr. Chair, I don't believe there's a way to answer that question related to planning applications, but I can say in general, Kingston Frontenac Housing Corporation, that's a co-applicant on this application, has an extensive process by which they try to identify those types of problems on the site and regularly provide relief for that and have a systematic approach to that. I'm sure we could provide some more information as the application process progresses so that the committee's comfortable with that.
Thank you.
Any further questions, comments? Yes, Councillor Hutchison.
Just, it was mentioned by the presenter that, and it seems, I'm sure it's true, that the neighborhood isn't really set up, even in terms of its physical infrastructure, to operate particularly efficiently. It's not this, there's another one, another picture there someplace, showing the blocks with the streets, one with the streets. And but it shows the changes. Now the changes are already there. So I'm just wondering what the thinking was. Clearly, it was identified. Okay, we want to have the same amount of housing or more, and we've changed the street setup. And I'm just a bit, I just would like more explanation about what we were thinking about when we did that. So I have a better understanding when somebody says, why are you doing all this? I can say, well, because it didn't work particularly well. We know all the social reasons, but it seems to me that the physical reasons weren't really thought out well 50, 60 years ago either. And somebody must have thought about this to make these particular changes in the streetscape and so on.
So, Chair, maybe get started, and I'm sure Mr. Laidman may want to add to this, being led by, project led by his department. So, a few things. First of all, one of the issue that came out when there were public engagement sessions that were organized was a lack of street frontage for a number of existing units. So, if you obviously have been in the area, you are aware that not all units have street frontage, and that can create a number of different issues. And I know that security or safety was mentioned earlier. That's definitely one of them. We heard as well from residents that even ordering things can be complicated if you have home delivery. So the intent with the creation of some of the laneways was to try to introduce as much street frontage as possible for units. The increased number of units and the diversity going to a lot more of the private, either private market or market rents, again, and reducing the number of affordable units, RGI, in that area is to try to, again, create a better balance. And that has resulted, though, in more units within the proposed area. So I don't know if Mr. Laidman wanted to add to that as well.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I think to follow up on Ms. Hurdle's comments, the reason for the laneways and the additional streets is for all the reasons that was mentioned. But once you make that infrastructure commitment and expenditure, you want to also be able to take advantage of that infrastructure. So if you'll notice that while there's a commitment to make a new road to increase the connectivity and all the safety reasons for the neighborhood, the additional units are now located on that road to help offset the costs of that additional infrastructure. Same with the private laneways, those additional ones, there's quite an extensive amount of laneways. So in order to take better advantage, now that we're committed to making those laneways, want to make sure that there's additional housing that's taking advantage of those laneways. The other thing I should mention too, in response to Mr. Martin's comments, the higher intensity development is on Montreal Street as part of Phase 3. So as you'll recall, there is a component of the overall Rideau Heights strategy that does contemplate an even higher density, and the most appropriate place to do so was along the Montreal Street corridor because it's a high frequency arterial in the official plan, and also it has the new express bus routes, and was the most appropriate place to take additional density. But it was felt through the rather extensive planning exercise that this Phase 2 could also handle additional density, not only for an economic reason, but for the neighborhood itself.
Thank you. That was, together, a very good answer. The one small technical question is, then a slight comment. Headway Park, when all is, it's obviously changed, you put a road through at the bottom, you've added housing there. How large is the park now? And then
Through you, Mr. Chair, I might need a moment to find that number.
not to worry, we found it, 2.87. So on the numbers, which I think should be corrected in the report, I think I figured out what was going on there, just to show I'm not trying to be just a jerk, okay? It says at the top of page 5, you're renovating 233 existing townhouses and constructing 192. If the bottom of grade 5 is correct, it's not 192, it's 195. If you add those two numbers together, you'll get your 428. At the bottom, you can't get where you want to go with the numbers supplied, but it looks like the 233 existing townhouses have been left off. So you're constructing, but also renovating. The renovated townhouses in the second mention at the bottom of page 5 are not mentioned again, so you can't get to your 428 that way. But once you do, you're gold, okay?
Thank you. Any further questions from the committee? Would you kindly take the chair?
Take the chair.
Thank you. First of all, I appreciate the human scale of what's being recommended to us, and I totally agree. The busier transit corridors like Montreal Street can accommodate greater density, and so I'm quite comfortable with that. But I do want to know, given the new and improved Ontario Building Code that has allowed up to 4 to 6 stories, has moved it from 4 to 6 stories for potential brick and board development. And I know the renovations are, you're talking about an internal renovation and not changing, I presume, the structure of the building. But on the new triplexes and stacked townhouses and townhouses, are you going to take advantage of the potential for up to 6 stories, or will they continue to be 4 stories?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no. The plan is that the triplexes, the townhouses be built, the towns would be the same height as the existing towns, 2 stories. The triplex is probably 3 stories, and then the apartment buildings would be up to 4 stories. Those are the heights that are envisioned in the zoning. Mr. Chair.
Yeah, the reason I ask is that some of the 4 to 6 story developments that I've seen in the core of the city still have very much a human scale. And that kind of development would give you the same amount of density, but potentially allow you to have more green space on site. So I think that would be a sound consideration. And that's it. Thank you.
The chair to you.
Thank you. So this public meeting is now officially closed, and we'll move on to it's the only public meeting we have tonight, and we're going to move on to our regular agenda. So, and I've had a request before we approve the agenda to make one minor change, just for convenience sake, and that is that we move the proposed briefing to just before item B, and that was a request made by the clerk. So I could entertain an amendment to make it so. Thank you. Councillor Sanik, Councillor Kiley, all those in favor? Carried. So approval of the agenda as amended. Councillor Sanik, Councillor Kiley, all those in favor? Carried. So do we have, we have confirmation of minutes from our April 4th meeting, and we've received those. If there's a mover and a shaker, we can move along. Thank you. Councillor Kiley, Councillor Sanik. We're going to switch it up this time. Any comments, questions? All those in favor? Carried. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. We have no delegations. The briefing has been moved. I will read out the business portion. The portion of the meeting, this portion of the meeting, the business section, is open to the public. The city has initiated a new process in which members of the public will have an opportunity to speak for up to 5 minutes on comprehensive reports presented before Planning Committee. Those wishing to provide oral comments at this meeting will be invited to do so. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the local planning appeal tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, that person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. So we'll move on to item A, which is zoning bylaw amendment, and that's by the City of Kingston Recreation and Leisure Services. And I see a planner moving to the podium, so it's all yours.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is James Barr, and I'm a planner with the City of Kingston. I'm here representing the application tonight for a zoning bylaw amendment to permit the Kingston East Community Center at 15 Grenadier. I'm here representing the application tonight on behalf of Lindsay Lambert, who's been working on the application but was unable to attend tonight. The purpose and effect of the application is to rezone the subject lands to a site-specific institutional zone to facilitate the proposed community center. The Kingston East Community Center would include a one-story, 1,900 square meter building with a 280 meter splash pad, outdoor lounge area, hard and soft landscaping, and a parking area for up to 56 vehicles. The proposed accessory uses include a fitness studio, washroom and change room facilities, a gymnasium with storage space, indoor walking track, common lounge space, a kitchen and server area, a drop-in child care center, a multi-purpose room, and reception areas and staff rooms. The location of the property is at the southeast corner of Highway 15 and Grenadier Drive, north of LaSalle Secondary School. It is in between the existing skate parks, and hopefully I can, sorry, my height makes things difficult sometimes. There we go. The proposed location on the 1.6 hectare site is in between the existing skate park and the existing tennis courts. The lands are bordered by existing commercial and single detached dwellings to the north, park space to the east, the secondary school to the south, and commercial and single detached dwellings to the west. The lands are 1.6 hectares in size with 84 meters of frontage onto Highway 15, which is this road right here, and 175 meters of frontage onto Grenadier Drive. The community center is proposed to be located 96 meters from Highway 15 and 32 meters at its closest point from Grenadier Drive. Vehicular access is proposed via the existing internal access road for the secondary school, and this is a signalized intersection. There'll be no vehicular access from Grenadier Drive. There are proposed improved pedestrian connections both to Highway 15, where the existing bus stop is along the existing internal road, as well as up to the intersection. There are 56 parking spaces proposed in the parking lot, which is east of the community center. The splash pad is proposed just north of the existing skate park in this location. And these are just some sample elevations which are currently as part of the site plan control application for the building. This being the south face, which would face into the internal road, and this being the the west elevation, which would face out towards the skate park and splash pad. As this is a zoning bylaw amendment application, it must be consistent with the provincial policy statement. The subject lands are located within an existing urban area and add to the mix of uses that exist within proximity to the site, which include commercial uses, low-density and high-density residential uses, institutional uses, and open space uses. The proposed site is on municipal services, and through the technical review, it has been determined that the site can be supported on the existing municipal services. By locating the community center adjacent to the institutional uses, public service facilities are being co-located to form a community hub where a variety of public services are offered. A review of the policies concluded that the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement. Applications for zoning bylaw amendment must conform with the city's official plan. The subject lands are designated a housing district under the city structure and open space in the Rideau Community Secondary Plan. A community center and accessory uses are permitted in both the designations. New development must demonstrate compatibility with existing surrounding land uses on items such as shadowing, intrusive overlook, increased levels of noise, odor, dust, and vibration, increased traffic, and diminished service levels because of existing social and/or physical infrastructure overload. Through the review, it has been determined that the application as it stands conforms to the policy of the official plan. A shadowing study was developed to examine the proposed shadowing both on the existing park and skate park itself and the proposed splash pad, as well as the existing surrounding residential neighborhood and the street network. And at the equinoxes, the site has been determined to have minor shadowing observed on the splash pad between the hours of 9 and 10 a.m., which is this graphic up here. It might be difficult to see, but the splash pad would be located in this sort of area up in the corner of the site. And shadowing is observed on the tennis courts in the evening prior to sunset at 5 p.m. There's no shadowing observed on the residential area to the north, which is Grenadier Drive and Grenadier Drive itself. The same is said for the summer solstice. An amending bylaw has been prepared to rezone the lands to the site-specific institutional zone, which will regulate the permitted uses, the reduced parking ratio, which is proposed as part of this application, allow off-site parking in proximity to the site, and the minimum parking area of a space. There have been a number of public comments received on the application, specifically dealing with a number of issues. The first being the programming of the building. All of these have been reviewed as part of the report, but I can give a quick overview of them now. We've also received 2 additional communications regarding the location of the community center on the site and the allocation of resources to construct the facility. And there's been one confusion about the proposed parking rate offered on site. The city is not proposing to charge a per hour rate for parking on site. It's specifically dealing with the Planning Act application and the reduction in the parking ratio as per the zoning bylaw. The application's proposed programming includes uses such as the gymnasium, basketball, volleyball, and pickleball. With regarding to future expansions, there was a question whether a second story had been considered, and the application as proposed only considers a 1-story building, and the applicant hasn't considered a second story for this location. There was a confusion with the civic addressing. The site is currently addressed as 15 Grenadier, but the primary access for the community center will be from Highway 15. So through the civic addressing review, planning staff have proposed the address of 779 Highway 15 to erase any confusion about where the access for the site is. There was a concern whether Highway 15 road widening would have an effect on the application. The setback of the building itself is almost 100 meters from Highway 15, so through review it has been determined that the widening of Highway 15 won't have a direct effect on the proposed community center. There are 56 on-site parking spaces proposed for the site, which will also benefit from the 142 parking spaces which are located at the secondary school. So there is a proposed reduction for the parking rate on site to allow only 56 parking spaces to be proposed on the east side of the building. But the school will, the application will benefit from the proximity of the school's parking spaces, which are an average 40 to 100 meters away from the site. So it's within a walking distance to the front door of the school for anything that might be a special event on evenings or weekends. There is a concern or a question about how this was the proposed location for the community center. Council in 2015 passed a motion to have this be the be the location of the Kingston East Community Center, so that a decision was decided in 2015, and this application has come forward as a result of that to install the land use planning permissions to allow this community center to move forward. And there was a concern about the loss of green space on site. The site is 1.6 hectares. It's a small portion of the park. There's a section of it located to the east of the actual site itself. The proposed application for this section has 62% of the site dedicated to landscaped open space, which is non-building, non-parking. So a large proportion of this 1.6 hectare site actually remains unbuilt and open for those open landscaped park amenities. In final review of the application, it has been deemed that the zoning bylaw amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to the official plan, and represents good land use planning. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have here.
Thank you. Did you want to so you covered the comments on the correspondence responses completely?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to the committee. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. I'm wondering how the opening of the third crossing will impact the traffic situation on the site. If you could speak about that, please.
Sure. I reviewed the traffic impact study before the meeting today. The existing road network as it stands today has been deemed to be sufficient to support the development, that the increase in traffic on the existing two-lane Highway 15 will have a negligible impact on the existing traffic loading. This portion of Highway 15 in the next, I think, 5 to 10 years has been slated for widening with the EA that's currently underway. The traffic study did review that portion as well, and the site will still have a negligible impact on the traffic, even with the expanded Highway 15. The third crossing wasn't mentioned in the report, but the traffic study examined the nearest intersections to the site, which would be affected by vehicular movements coming to and from this site.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Sanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, for the Unity Center, so it's going to be a gym, and there's also going to be a walking track. Do you know, is the walking track going to be around the gym, or how that works out? Like, I don't think this is going to Arts Recreation Committee, so Policies Committee. So I guess if we have any questions about how, like, what the community center would actually look like, we would ask the questions here tonight, right?
Through you, Mr. Chair. You can ask the questions here as well, and I can relay anything that I might not be able to answer to the applicants. There is an existing site plan control application in now, and looking at the floor plans for that, the walking track is internal to the building and located around the gymnasium. So the gymnasium space would be the pickleball, the basketball, and that activity. So that's right in the center with the walking track around it.
There would be like, they have the track around the outside of the gym that's in the center, like that?
I'm unfamiliar with the facility. I can't draw that conclusion tonight. Sorry.
Yes, Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, and through Mr. Chair. So I actually had a look at the drawings, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and yes, I do believe, Councillor Osanig, that the track is around the gym as you described it, and working with especially the Seniors Association, that's something that was flagged as an element that they wanted to see inside the community center.
Thank you. Did you have your hand up, or you're just pointing over my shoulder? Good. Thank you very much. But did you have a question or comment?
Following up on Councillor Hasanik's questions. When this was planned, I'm presuming it was planned relative to the Kingston East population and the projections, whatever growth projections there might be there. So this just seems to me a due diligence question to ask about this, because it's not that ambitious a building, seems to me. I mean, it's good if the focus seems to be on being a community center rather than an athletic center. when I read the list of things that are there. It's not that you can't do athletic things there, but the focus seems to be, can you have gatherings? Can you meet there? So on. So just something about what philosophy is taken into account and whether it accounts for population. That's my question.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So a couple of things. One is in terms of decision to go ahead with a community center, there is obviously some work that was done and presented to council as far as population growth in the Kingston East area, and all of you, I'm sure, are aware that we currently do not really have any community facility in the Kingston East area outside of the library itself. So there was definitely a need identified for that type of community space. As far as the design is concerned and the type of programming within the community center, it was based on the feedback and input that we received from residents. So there were a number of meetings that did take place with community residents in the area, also with partners. So similar to Rideau Heights, we looked at partnering with Boys and Girls Club, the Seniors Association, Loving Spoonful, all of those organizations that will be present to deliver services from that community center.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Sanik.
Thank you, and I just have another question, and this might be any of the planners that can help me with it. So we have sort of what the landscape plan looks like on page 112 in the package. And so for the trees, I can't remember which way is which, because there's no legend that actually identifies which way is the tree, but for trees, we have just like a blank circle around, right? And then there's also a circle with sort of petals, and I can't remember in a diagram which one is an existing tree and which one represents like a new tree that's going to be planted. But it's good to see so many trees. I just wonder which ones are the ones that we're keeping, and I think that's just the blank circle around. I guess probably standard in all landscaping plans. I just don't see that in the legend at all.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. The ones with more detailed hatching, I guess, in the circle area are trees that we are planting, and then the ones which have less detail are ones which are to remain. There are 30 trees being removed from the subject lands, and they're actually replacing them at a greater than 1-to-1 ratio, so they're taking out 30, 34 going in, and they're following the recommendations from the arborist report to plant trees with a base height diameter of 6 centimeters, which were consistent with the report. So, and forestry has reviewed both the zoning bylaw amendment application and the site plan and is satisfied with that recommendation being carried out through the site plan.
Thank you. Seeing no more hands, I'll turn to the public. The public portion of this meeting is now open. If anybody would like to ask questions or make comments, a microphone is yours for 5 minutes. Seeing none, I will call this meeting, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong space here. I will ask for a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Sanik, seconded by Councillor Kiley. Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. And we'll now have Mr. Newman give us a briefing.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. My name is Greg Newman, the Manager of Policy Planning, and I'm going to be very brief. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Andrea Furness, who's the Senior Planner with the City and is the lead on this project, and she will introduce the project, and our colleague Jamie Cook from Watson. So.
Thank you and good evening, Mr. Chair, committee members, and members of the public. Tonight we're here to present the Population, Housing, and Employment Forecast Study, which was completed for the City of Kingston as well as the Kingston Census Metropolitan Area, which is composed of the City of Kingston, Loyalist Township, the Frontenac Islands, and South Frontenac. Population, housing, employment forecasts are extremely significant for the municipality. We use them in long-range growth planning, transportation, infrastructure, service delivery planning, and they're reflected in a number of city documents, including the official plan, the water and wastewater master plan, the transportation plan, active transportation plan, and I can go on. Once we have a set of forecasts that's endorsed by council, they are going to be immediately used as well in the ongoing recreation master plan, the development charges background study, the update to the transportation master plan, as well as the next iteration of the official plan comprehensive review. So the last round of forecasts were completed in 2013, and we update them every 5 years in order to reflect new Statistics Canada data, as well as to reflect any new emerging trends that we may need to consider as well. So last year we retained Watson and Associates economists in order to update the forecasts and to extend them to the year 2046. So Watson and Associates has prepared 3 growth scenarios for population, housing, and employment, a low, a medium base, and a high case scenario, which they'll go through in a little bit. But we also included some additional components into this study as well. One of them being providing an analysis into why the 2013 forecasts were predicting higher growth than what was reported out in the 2016 census data. And we also had the consultant take a review of student population change in the city as well, and looking at long-term enrollment growth and trying to really get a grasp of total housing needs in the municipality. So not just housing needs units to accommodate future growth, but as well as the additional units needed on top of that in order to address demand and achieve a healthier vacancy rate in the city. In terms of public consultation, we held 2 open houses that were very well attended, and also posted the draft study online for a commenting period. So we did receive quite a bit of feedback in that, and all the comments and how we responded to them were reflected in the accompanying staff report. And we also met with a number of stakeholders throughout the process, such as CFB Kingston. We held several meetings with the post-secondary institutions, the Home Builders Association, and the Planning Advisory Working Group, to name a few. And we did receive quite a bit of input and support and considerations that were brought into this study as a result of that consultation process. So I'm not going to get into the details of the study. I'll leave that to our consultant. So I'd like to introduce Jamie Cook, who's the Director of Land Economics at Watson and Associates. And he's here this evening to present the growth forecast, as well as the additional subcomponents of the study that I just outlined briefly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. It's a pleasure to be before you, Mr. Chair, members of committee, staff, and the public. So I'm going to go through about a 20-minute presentation that's going to outline the key findings of our draft analysis. I'm going to pretty much skip over the study purpose. You've had a good introductory from Andrea in terms of why we're doing this study and the key objectives of the study. Want to start off with really throwing the key findings at you right now, and then we'll come back and go through them in more detail. So overall, we're expecting steady population growth and employment growth over the next 30 years within the city and the surrounding Central Metropolitan area, including all post-secondary students. The city's population base is projected to increase by about 29,000 over the 30-year period, and about 11,000 jobs. To accommodate that forecast, we're projecting an increase of about 13,700 additional units that would be required throughout the city of Kingston. So I want to start off looking at the Kingston CMA forecast. As Andrea mentioned, we looked broadly at Eastern Ontario, then we drilled down to the CMA area, and then ultimately to the City of Kingston, and ultimately to come up to our ultimate findings. As you probably know, the population in Canada is aging as it is in Ontario and Eastern Ontario, and that's a theme that you'll see come up quite a bit in the report that I prepared. Because of that aging population in Canada and all the way down to Kingston, we are heavily reliant on net migration as a source of population growth. The CMA is not immune to this economic trend and this requirement, nor is the City of Kingston, and that's something you'll see, as I say, throughout the analysis, that we are dependent increasingly on net migration to achieve an even comparable rate of population growth to historical trends. There's a number of drivers that we've looked at that are anticipated to influence population growth and employment growth within the Kingston CMA and the city over the long term. One of those key drivers is Kingston's importance as a regional center. The city, as you know, is the second largest urban area in Eastern Ontario. It has a hub of employment that serves the broader commuter shed in a number of sectors, export-based sectors, knowledge-based sectors, as well as other population-serving sectors. That will continue to be a key factor that will drive the overall labor force, employment, and population growth in Kingston over the long term. The city is also attracted to the 55-plus population. And while this isn't a major component of population growth, it is a factor, somewhat more than other communities. The city's housing prices relative to other large urban areas are competitive. We have a significant amount of cultural and natural and historic heritage within the city, access to the surrounding countryside. All these things go into being an attractive environment for the 55-plus population, which we expect to see a steady amount of net migration. Oh, sorry.
That's weird.
That's not it. There we go. All right, sorry about that. The city's geographic location along the 401 corridor is also a significant attribute, particularly with respect to the city's established and growing industrial business parks. And also, quality of life is a key factor. Similar to those factors that are drawing the 55-plus population, Kingston's quality of life is also attractive to the broader population as a whole, but it's also attractive to prospective businesses that are looking to locate within the city of Kingston. And we find in a lot of the competitiveness studies that we do, this issue is becoming more and more of a factor in attracting new business to a community. So I wanted to start off with looking at labor force growth within the Kingston CMA as a start. This is really the sort of the crux of how a population forecast model works. Not to get into all the mechanics of it, because if you'd like to look at more detail, there's a lot of detail in the appendix. But essentially, the regional labor force potential is really the key draw ultimately to the population growth within the city of Kingston. There has to ultimately be a draw of why people are going to be attracted to move to Kingston with respect to net migration. So labor force is one of those key draws of the key driver of net migration. Net migration ultimately drives population growth, which then leads to housing need. Looking at the historical trends, we've had modest labor force growth in the city of Kingston and the CMA over the past 15 years. Going forward, we expect the labor force projections also to be modest, growing at about 7,400 total labor force over the 30-year period. And I just want to back up for a second too to explain the definition of labor force. So labor force is all those that are 15 and older that are either employed or looking for work that live in Kingston. They don't necessarily all have jobs in Kingston. Some of those people live in Kingston and commute outside in the surrounding commuter shed, and some live and work within Kingston. So it's different than jobs. Jobs is measuring the inflow of in-commuters as well as live-work employment. So it's important to make that distinction when looking at the two. I also want to point out that the labor force potential, the growth rate is diminishing moderately over the long-term forecast period. It's because the labor force is aging as well as the population, and that's having a downward impact on the overall rate of labor force growth. And then the last thing I want to just point out here is the labor force participation rate. So this is the number of total labor, 15 plus over the total population, the population 15 plus. And this relationship gives us a direct connection between labor force and total population requirements 15 plus. And so again, this is a core foundation of the work that we've done. So building on that labor force forecast, we prepared 3 long-term population forecasts. As Andrea mentioned, we prepared a low forecast, a base scenario, and a high scenario. The base scenario is the scenario that we're going forward with as our recommendation. This scenario sees an overall increase of population of about 21,300 people in the Kingston CMA over that 30-year period. That is a overall growth rate of about 0.4%. So moderate growth, steady growth, slow growth. It could be really determined and articulated really relative to other areas. Relative to the surrounding area in Eastern Ontario, it's a steady rate of growth. Relative to the province as a whole, you're growing at a slower rate than the province. The province's population growth, based on the Ministry of Finance projections, is anticipated to grow at a rate of about 1% a year. A lot of that growth is dominated by the Greater Toronto Area and Hamilton and the surrounding Greater Golden Horseshoe in terms of the rate. Ottawa's growth rate's also relatively higher. So just to put that in perspective, it's a lower rate, but a steady rate of growth relative to the surrounding area. It works out to about 700 people a year that we're adding to the Kingston CMA over the forecast period. Also just wanted to mention in the other scenarios, you can see that the low scenario does show a bending trend over the long term, a downward sort of bend. That downward bend is largely a result, again, of the aging of the population and the fact that as the population ages, the population growth that you're going to generate from natural increase, which is births less deaths, starts to diminish and become ultimately negative. And so without a significant amount of net migration to support that downward trend in natural increase, the overall low scenario tends to bow downward over the long term. That diminishing trend is less pronounced in the medium forecast and then even less pronounced in the high forecast. This is just a quick summary of the employment forecast. The employment forecast in Kingston's more aggressive than the labor force forecast, and you'll see that when you look at the historical trends as well. The city's employment has been growing at a more rapid rate. So the actual jobs in Kingston has been growing at a more rapid rate than labor force, and it's anticipated to grow at a faster rate, adding about 13,000 jobs over the next 30 years. About 2/3 of those jobs are anticipated within the commercial and institutional sectors. However, we have also noted that the industrial sector is showing signs of recovery, and we've seen development activity occurring in areas like the Cataract Way Estates Business Park, and we do expect to see more industrial growth occurring in Kingston than what was projected in the previous projections in 2013. We also prepared 3 long-term scenarios of employment for the Kingston CMA. Again, a low, medium, and high, or base and high scenario. Similar to the population forecast, the employment forecast is growing at a moderate rate at about 0.5% a year. So it's growing just slightly faster than the population growth, but at a relatively comparable level. And under the low scenario, it's projected to be at 0.2% and the high at 0.7. So I want to now drill down to the City of Kingston level data. So we've talked a bit about the components of population growth. So just a bit of review. We've got net migration and natural increase. Similar to the CMA, the city is going to be very reliant on net migration as a source of population growth. You can see that over the forecast period, we summarized here at the bottom that population change associated with natural increase is anticipated to become negative over the first half of the forecast at negative 200, so just slightly negative. But then over the longer term, that negative trend starts to increase at an overall rate of negative 5,200. So because of that negative trend, again, similar to the CMA, the city is quite dependent on net migration as a source of population growth. And the city is well aware of this. It has prepared a, what was this? Sorry, the name of the study was the Workforce and In-Migration Strategy. And that strategy was, recommended by the city through the strategic plan back in 2017. So there's ongoing work to determine and develop ways to increase the city's amount of net migration over the medium and long-term period. So you can see historically the amount of net migration has really varied quite considerably over time. In 1986 to 91, we had a fairly booming economy globally, and nationally, and regionally. We had a lot of net migration. Over the longer term period, we saw more moderate levels of migration, and then more of an increase in migration in the 06-11 period, and fairly modest levels in the last 5-year census period. We've been averaging about 3,900 new migrants every 5-year period. We're projecting to grow just over 4,000 migrants every 5-year period. So it's about a 5% increase relative to those historical trends. We don't really have the ability to accurately and with precision identify fluctuations like you see in the historical data. Those fluctuations in many ways are influenced by economic cycles that are hard to project, but we do project that over the longer term that net migration will start to diminish modestly as the overall population growth rate more regionally and locally slows down. So we've mentioned the aging of the population. This is a chart that just summarizes that aging population trend. And just a couple things I want to point out is that in 2016, about 19% of the population was in the 65 plus category. That share is anticipated to grow to about 25% in 2046. So in 2046, about 1 in 4 residents within Kingston will be in the 65 plus age group. And what's even more important, though, is to look at that trend between 65 to 74 and 75 plus. When you look at that trend, you can see a lot of that growth is occurring in the 75 plus category. The 65 to 74 age groups showing a slight decrease in proportion, while the 75 plus age group's growing at a very rapid rate. And that growth rate is really largely driven by the aging of the existing baby boom population within the city that will continue to age over the long term. And so these trends obviously have very significant implications on the need for housing, different forms of housing, whether they're affordable housing, seniors housing, more diversity in density and form, which we've touched on in this study, but we haven't prepared a housing strategy per se, but we've definitely identified, I think, a lot of the key foundational requirements to ultimately develop and further develop your housing strategy. At the other end of that, if you look at the 0 to 19 age group, you can see that age group down here is showing a decline in population. So in 2016, it was at 13%, declining to 10% in 2046. Now, I do want to be clear that this trend is happening pretty much all over the country. It's happening all over most areas of the province. Your 65 plus age group is a little bit higher today than the provincial average, and you're growing just a little bit quicker in that age group. But it's not a extremely unique scenario or situation. It's really a broader demographic phenomenon that most countries, to be honest, in the Western world are facing. So similar to the CMA projections, we prepared 3 long-term forecasts for the city of Kingston. Again, a low, base, and a high. The base case scenario projects an increase of about 18,600 people over the 30-year period, and that's a growth rate of about 0.5%. So relative to the CMA, you're growing just a little bit faster at 0.5%, but keeping in mind that the city obviously comprises the majority of the population of the CMA, so they're very obviously correlated. Again, we have a low scenario and a high scenario that are growing at respectively 1% a year and 8% a year over the long-term period. And similarly, we've projected an employment forecast for the city growing at a similar rate to the population forecast. Overall, the city is expected to add about just under 11,000 jobs over the 30-year forecast period. So I wanted to then move over to housing, looking at all the potential housing within the city, including those that are not captured in the census and those that are captured. Largely those that aren't captured are students, and there's some other components as well, but largely it's a student issue, as you know. And so as looking at the, as a starting point, looking at the student population, we took a look at what the full-time enrollment is for the 3 universities and, the 2 universities in the St. Lawrence College with, based on discussions with each of those institutions. We've determined that the full-time existing enrollment is about 28,500. Of that number, about 21,600 are off campus, about 6,900 are living on campus. When we look at the off-campus component, about 16,700 of that off-campus component are living in rental housing that we would consider to be not captured in the existing census, the census data. The other components are either those that are living at home or are living in Kingston on a permanent basis and are captured in the census. So in total, there's about 23,600 students that are not captured by the census as of 2016. That's about 83% of the full-time enrollment within the city of Kingston. So we provided a long-term enrollment projection for the city of Kingston. We recognize that projecting long-term enrollment is not an easy task. We spoke to each of the 2 universities and the college. They essentially provide forecasts out over about a 2 to 3 year period. It was a bit of a daunting task to try to prepare a long-term forecast over a 30-year period. However, looking at historical trends, also with information that was provided by the universities, looking at the geographic origin of students, either those that are local, regional, coming from other parts of Canada, or international, we're able to provide some intelligence into the potential growth rate of the 3 post-secondary institutions combined. What we've found is that if you look over to the left here, that this data was largely driven by looking at population trends in the 0 to 19 category for these various places of origin associated with the 2 universities and the college. The growth rate in the 0 to 19 category is anticipated to be relatively modest over the 30-year period, which is really a key factor that's driving the increasing percentage of international students over the long term. We do recognize that this is a balance that the universities and the college are striving to achieve. They recognize that their international composition will increase over time. In reviewing this with them, they're generally supportive of the numbers that we've provided. Overall, we're looking at an increase in the enrollment of about 11,500. That's just over about 1% enrollment a year. So if you compare that to how the 2 universities and the colleges have been growing on a composite level historically, it's quite a bit more modest in terms of the rate of growth that we've seen, and that's discussed a little bit further in the report. Of that total 11,500, about 10,400 are anticipated to be not captured by the census data. So that's about 90%. Of that 90%, about Around 25% or 2,500 are anticipated to be on campus, living on campus. About just under 8,000 are anticipated to be off campus. And we further looked at the average occupancies that we're seeing in post-secondary institutions in off-campus housing. We have noted that the average occupancy levels are declining to some extent over recent years. We've projected an overall average occupancy level of about 2.35, and that's relatively consistent with some of the trends that we're seeing in some of the existing neighborhoods in Kingston that are largely dominated by student population. So when we look at the overall population, when we add those that are not captured by the census, the city's population is expected to grow from about 151,300 to about 180,300. So this is where the 29,000 people come into play. It is noted that the student population is growing at a faster rate, or the population not captured in the census is growing at a faster rate. So that share of the population in the light blue is increasing modestly over time from about 16% in 2016 to about 19% in 2046. And then looking at the housing growth, including those that are not captured in the census, the city's housing forecast is expected to increase by about 13,700, as I mentioned, from about 57,600 to about 71,300. And similarly, that share of the population, or the housing not captured by the census, is also anticipated to increase over time from about 7% to about 10%. So we also wanted to show this in terms of the type of housing that we're expected to see and the rate of housing in 5-year increments and how that compares relative to historical trends. And so I think there's a couple things that I think jump out at me when I see this data. One is that the amount of net migration that's required to achieve a slightly lower level of housing growth is, I think, somewhat surprising at times. I think it's not always intuitive to recognize that as the population ages, PPU levels are declining, the overall relationship between and net migration and housing is not a direct one-to-one. So we see the need for more migration to achieve even the same level of population and even the same level of housing growth. It's also important to recognize that the type of housing is changing in Kingston, and it's been changing over the past several decades. In the past 5-year period, we saw almost 50% of the housing activity in terms of residential building permit activity for new units in the form of high-density housing. And that trend is really being market-driven by demographics as well as affordable housing or affordability issues. Over the long term, we are projecting, as I mentioned, I think the number was about 458 over, I got to check my overall average, about 458 over the long-term period. Starting off in the first 5 years, we do expect to see relatively stronger growth than what we've seen in the last 10 years. And we've already got a bit of a window on that by looking at the building permit activity that we're seeing coming in 2016, 17, and 18 during the post-census period. So that gives us a pretty good view in terms of what to expect in the next 5 years, given that lag between building permit issuance and the occupancy of those units. We're projecting that the share of housing will continually steadily shift towards a more high-density oriented housing base. And we've also identified that in the first 5 years, there is a need to accommodate more rental housing within the city of Kingston. Right now, the overall rental vacancy rate is about 0.6%. This is more or less a conceptual analysis that identifies the amount of additional housing that would be required in the next 5 years to get that rental vacancy rate up to about 3%. It works out to about an additional 645 units, or about 129 units a year. So in conclusion, just want to wrap up on 3 main themes: the economy, population, and housing. So as I mentioned, the The city's population and employment growth is really largely tied to the broader economic region in Eastern Ontario. The overall competitiveness of the regional economy and that broader market are going to have a large role in fueling the strength of job growth in both knowledge-based sectors, service sectors, as well as traditional export-based sectors like the manufacturing sector. And so the attractiveness of Kingston to new migrants is really going to be heavily dependent on the overall competitive position of the economy, growth potential in those key sectors that I mentioned, especially when we're discussing the youth workforce. So as I mentioned, over the long term, the city's population is expected to increase at a steady to moderate level, adding about 29,000 people, or about 0.7% a year. So this is looking at the total population, both census population and those that are not captured. But as we mentioned, the aging of that population will have a downward impact on the overall long-range potential for population and labor within the city. In terms of housing, the city's housing stock is anticipated to increase, as I mentioned, the permanent housing by about 10,400. That's a rate of about 0.6% a year. Housing growth is expected to grow by about 2,300 units, or about 2% annually. That's a total of 13,700 total units. And as I mentioned, similar to the population, the overall rate of housing growth is anticipated to slow down over the long term as well, given those more slowing trends in labor and population. And lastly, in terms of the rental market, we've identified that about an additional 645 rental units would be required in the near term to achieve a 3% vacancy rate within the city of Kingston in more immediate terms. This is in addition to the 8,700 units that we've identified over the long-term period. And I guess the last point I just want to make is that, again, we've noted that the composition of housing is changing, but also the composition of the population is changing. We're seeing a more diverse population, an aging population. That diversity needs to be reflected in the housing stock as well, with a broader range of housing typologies with respect to built form, location, and affordability. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Great. Any questions for the presenter? Yes, Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, and thank you for your presentation. I've followed along. I was at the 2 open houses that you mentioned, so it's been neat to see this project iterate. And also thank you for taking into consideration some of the questions that we asked along the way. It was very helpful, and also how you annotated that within the report to see where we had asked something and you had replied. So that was very clear for us, and it's appreciated.
Thank you.
So just a few questions, mainly around the student population. I just want to be sure that I'm understanding this as clearly as I can. Of the 8,700 new units that will be needed, yeah, that was on your last slide there, rental housing units anticipated over the 30-year forecast period. Does that include the 3,300 that you're anticipating students will occupy? That was mentioned earlier.
Yes, that's the total amount of rental. We're assuming that essentially all of the student housing would be in the rental category.
All right, thank you. And then considering the student population and how we count it or don't count it within the CMA census area here, is it fair to assume that if we were to retain more students, a larger percentage of students who come to Kingston for post-secondary studies, if we were to keep more of them here, they would make up for the loss of net migration in the next 30 years? Because we're not counting them as part of our population already. I'm not sure if that question is clear.
So when we're looking at all the statistics that I provided in the report and tonight, when we're looking at net migration, are looking at the census population data. And so we really, the trouble is that we don't have the same level of detail and granularity when it comes to the student population. So StatsCan doesn't report out on the student details on the student population. They do provide information on total housing, but they don't provide information on population. So we don't really know details on trends such as net migration. So the net migration trends that we're looking at are really speaking to the permanent population trend and that aging of the permanent population, which is driving that downward relationship between natural increase and then the greater dependency on net migration. So I'm not sure if that, it probably doesn't totally answer your question because I don't think we have the data to really.
Well, I think it does, in fact, because if we're only dealing with the permanent population and not including that large portion of the students, you said something like 87% isn't captured in that permanent population number. Therefore, if we were to retain more of them, it kind of offset that decline in the permanent population.
So just to be clear, though, we are including those that are not captured by the census in the actual population forecast that I provided. So I provided a forecast of permanent or census population, but also the total population.
Okay.
I just didn't speak to the total population in terms of net migration. That's all. So I just want to be clear. We have looked at both.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and maybe to add to that, so yes, students are part of the population that we are targeting with the in-migration. And part of the initiatives that we're looking at, or we have actually started to implement, is to target some of the students, especially Queen's University, that right now we're not retaining as many of those. And they would be part of those numbers that we need to achieve for the in-migration in order to continue to see our population grow.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from the committee? Yes, Councillor Hutchison.
Just a couple. Okay, so the population, what I got was in your base case scenario. The population would grow by about, well, in one place it's at 620 per year. Another one is 701. I suppose it's not enough to matter. Right? Maybe you have a comment on that. And then the jobs were growing at 340 per year. So numbers, that's taking into account then the numbers of these people. I suppose if you're counting students and seniors, these would make up the difference. Is that it? They're not employed. If there's more people coming in than there are jobs being created.
Yeah, typically we find, so that relationship you're talking about is called the employment activity rate, and it is mentioned in the report, and it's also mentioned in the CMA analysis. I think I actually have in the graph here. For the CMA, we've identified the activity rates around 50%, 52%, which is, and it's fair. I think it's similar. Actually, I think it's higher in the city. I'd have to pull it up. So at a high level, you have a very strong activity rate. You've got a high percentage of people who are working relative to the population. Because you are a regional center and you're drawing a lot of people into the community rather than drawing people out. So I live in Oakville. A lot of people get into their car and travel either through the GO or in other modes to other places of employment. We have a fairly low activity rate. That activity rate is anticipated to increase just slightly over the long-term period. But the aging of the existing population does have a downward trend on that overall activity rate because ultimately more people are entering into the 65 plus category. You are going to see more people leaving the workforce, but you're also seeing increasingly amounts of commuting pressure coming from outside of the community that's also helping to keep your activity rate relatively steady. So we projected it to grow very modestly over the long-term period. I don't know if that answers your question, but I just think it's important to try to discuss that relationship between employment and population.
Just trying to get a grasp on the relationship of the population growth to the number of jobs created, because that's been key in previous projections or forecasts.
Yeah, so the
whichever one you want to use.
The overall job growth is 13,000. The overall population growth, including those that aren't captured, is about 29,000. So that activity rate, though, that I'm measuring in the CMA and in the city is looking at the activity rate of total jobs to the census population and the forecast population, excluding those that aren't captured in the census. So it's important when you're looking at these stats that I'm clear about what's in the population and what's out. I will say that in the previous analysis that was done in 2013, the forecast was more aggressive. It was more aggressive for both population and employment, but it was, I think, relatively even more aggressive on the employment side of things. And so while what we're finding is that the population is not growing as fast as the previous projections were anticipated to grow in the short term, in the longer term, we actually do get to a very close position at the end point in 2041, and that's summarized in the back of the report. But when it comes to the job growth, we're not as aggressive on the overall rate of job growth by 41 as the 2013 report. So we are looking at more job growth in labor, but we're not as aggressive as we were in 13.
Okay.
Or not, and obviously I didn't do the study in 13 just to be.
Yeah, I remember that. I'm sorry I'm messing around here, but my laptop crashed, okay, so.
No, not at all.
It does it quite frequently, unfortunately. So I've got to back up again, so I'll see if I can find the questions I had. So I'm sure you took this into account, but the commercial business studies have been done. The last two indicated that Kingston, by provincial standards, was oversupplied. And so I guess, I'm assuming you took this into account, so this might be a one-word answer. But at some point, if you're oversupplied and you are counting, or not counting on, but you're indicating that 2/3 of the job growth was commercial, and I think the other aspect was institutional. There's not going to be any room for growth, any more growth, because you're reaching some form of near saturation, would you not?
I think Greg wanted to speak to that first, and I'm happy to also follow up if there's any need to discuss it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just I can start maybe in, as Jamie mentioned. So just to be clear, it's 2/3 of the growth, or 2/3 of the eventual composition of employment in Kingston will be commercial/industrial.
No, institutional.
It's institutional is the remaining 1/3 of the growth?
No, it's 2/3 commercial institutional.
Okay.
What I would,
You see where I'm going. It just seems strange to count on jobs in the commercial sector that's oversupplied.
I guess just to
and has been for a while. So if you can.
No, it's a great point. I think I get these questions about the retail market and the disruptions that we're seeing in the retail sector and e-commerce and impacts on bricks and mortar, and so that has been factored in. And I think it's one of the key reasons why we are lower in terms of our overall rate of employment growth over the long term relative to the previous forecast. I just also want to be clear though, when I talk about commercial, I'm not just talking about retail. There's a whole bunch of sectors that comprise commercial outside of retail, sectors like professional and scientific services, culture and information, real estate, finance, insurance, all those sectors. So they're also embedded in that sector. Even sectors like recreation is in there, because while we can get really granular, and we do that in the background in the appendix, we ultimately roll that up to what we call ICI, industrial, commercial, institutional. So we are lumping a lot of retail and office and non-retail into that category. So I do want to be clear that it's a bit of a dog's breakfast of sectors that ultimately get put into that commercial category. Relative to the previous forecast, we're actually, believe it or not, we're more balanced between industrial, commercial, institutional than we were before. I really think that the previous forecast understated the amount of industrial potential. And I think in fairness to the previous report, they were preparing that report in a very ugly time economically. We were coming off one of the worst economic downturns in 2009. The data that we were getting out of the census and the other Statistics Canada data was horrible, looking at manufacturing data and industrial data. So there's a tendency to be a bit overly negative on the industrial sector, and since that time, we've seen a gradual recovery in that sector, and we expect to see a continued recovery in that sector. So it does seem maybe a bit, still a little bit too maybe weighted towards the service sector. It is more balanced.
Fair enough. Now, relative to the draft that came out before, is this projecting more growth in population, the same, or less?
It's pretty much the same as what we had before. We've slightly augmented the and the natural increase. In terms of those two components, when you look at the natural increase, it's really fertility and mortality. The fertility rates in the Kingston CMA and the city are quite low relative to the provincial average. And we feel that it's more likely to see an increase in net migration than it is in a big rebound in the fertility rates over the long term. But we did acknowledge that our long-term trend in fertility was a bit pessimistic. And there's other studies that are going on concurrently with what I'm doing here that have been involved in the study to help also provide some input, and based on questions that we received, we did slightly increase the fertility, which had a little bit of a downward impact on net migration. But overall, I'd say the forecast is pretty much the same forecast that you would have seen at the public meeting in December.
Great, thank you. So one thing I got by one of the answers, not my fault, not the other person. So if we're growing by 29,000 between 2016 and 2046, students are included in that.
Yes, they
overall.
They are included in that number.
And they are growing at 2%. The rest of the population is growing, or the whole population is growing at 0.7 of 1%.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
So basically, this all boils down to that we're going to grow, but we're going to grow very modestly. So that has to color our view on everything we do. Would that seem reasonable?
Yeah, I guess I think it's relative in terms of how you characterize the growth rate. If this was a municipality within the Greater Toronto Area, I would say this is slow growth. Growth relative to the surrounding area in Eastern Ontario, I would say this is moderate growth. There's many communities that aren't going to see very much growth at all, and other communities that will see a bit more, like Ottawa, obviously, will see a little bit more growth in terms of the rate. But relative to other larger, medium-sized and large urban centers, you're growing comparably or in some cases at a faster rate.
So, Mr. Chair, if I just may add, so agree that if we, in terms of, our past growth, Kingston overall has had a modest growth. We've never been a fast-growing community, I think, and we've always based our plans on that. But one thing that I do want to draw to your attention, and I appreciate those are estimate numbers, but on page 11 of 20 of the actual staff report, we do indicate that Stats Canada released some estimated numbers for Kingston CMA, which showed that the area was actually at 173, a little bit over 173,000 people. Right now, our estimated numbers that you have in this report are showing 171 by 2021. Now, I'm not saying that these estimates from StatsCan are carved in stone and they're, exact, but what I'm saying is that even if there's a discrepancy, we're still seeing a much higher number, I think, that we would have anticipated at this point in time.
Okay.
If I could just elaborate on that. This graph here does provide a bit more of a graphical representation of what Lenny's been talking about here in terms of the short-term population forecast. So this is that 173,000, that 450, that is the current estimate by StatsCan in 2018 compared to our estimate with the undercount, which is, there's a percentage of population missed when census does its enumeration. It's around 3%, and that's what that green line represents. So relative to what StatsCan's projecting right now, we actually feel our forecast is a little, could be considered conservative. I think there's a lot of statistical analysis that goes into this, and so I'm not going to get into all the details, but it does provide you with a bit of context.
I think what I was getting, I'm fine with growing modestly, slowly, if it's realistic. If that's what I'm most interested in, is that the projections are realistic and we're not kidding ourselves. Because there's a tendency to want to do that because it colors commercial activity, real estate activity. You know, growth is good, and maybe growth is, but if you're not actually going to have it, that's the issue. You got to adjust accordingly in order to maximize the quality of life and even your opportunities, what you consider opportunities. That's why I was interested in the activity rate, and that you have the projected percentage of jobs relative to the projected population growth. At least that's what I got out of the notes, right? Mm-hmm. And so if an older population is coming into town, they're not going to be taking jobs. And so when we think about people immigrating, we think, oh, there'll be families, the young people, they'll be working. Not necessarily. As we know, older people from, like, it's a smart thing to do. If you live in Toronto and then you want to come to Kingston, like, you're going to pay, like, you're going to make $800,000 on the house you own, and you're going to pay $400,000 for the slightly downsized thing that the property that you're going to buy, right? So presumably, hopefully even, well, we're going to see some of that. But it's what it's saying as a whole.
I'm sorry,
so
is there a question?
My question, well, I think I was getting there. So that's what I wanted to emphasize. That's all.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Councillor Hutchison, I think to your comment is it's around the population increase that we are expecting, or that we might be even seeing based on the estimated number of July 1st, 2018 from StatsCan. Is that essentially a population that will be available in the job market? We know that skilled labor is critical, especially as we're seeing more and more retirements across the board. So this is where you're correct in terms of individuals retiring from Toronto and wanting to relocate, but that's also true of people working in Toronto, where the cost of living is also much higher, and especially when people have children, we know that a lot of them, in terms of family time, it's a lot more difficult in the GTA. So part of the intent here with some of the work we're doing around in-migration, workforce development, is to try to sell that quality of life to people that are in the labor force, so we can attract them and fill some of these positions that I know a number of organizations and businesses are struggling to fill in terms of skilled labor force.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanik, did you have anything? No? Sure, go ahead.
Thank you to staff. Process, after we adopt this report or accept it, will the numbers be benchmarked against the new census data as they come out in years to come, just to kind of see if it's trending in the right direction, or if the assumptions that were built into the analysis were accurate? How does this get used going forward beyond the next 2 or 3 years until the new numbers come out?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we do this every 5 years, so there will be some reflection on how we aligned with what the census tells us. But as Mr. Cook has mentioned, the census is missing key components of the City of Kingston's population that we need to have a good understanding of, and that's why it's really important to do these every 5 years and to see how portions of the population that may not be captured by the census are changing. So we do this every 5 years so that we have a good understanding of the City of Kingston's population.
That note about the portions of the population that aren't represented in the census, has there been any movement on getting more accurate numbers from the post-secondary institutes? I remember that was something that was brought up at, I believe, the second open house, that was a potential problem, and there's going to be a pursued relationship on that front.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. The post-secondary institutions, they are only able to plan out about 3 years. The province has what they call an enrollment corridor that includes like a maximum funded enrollment that they change every 3 years. Queen's University, for example, they base their forecasting on that. And because of the uncertainty around the changes every 3 years, they don't produce long-term forecasts. However, we did rely on the short-term forecasts as well as discussions with them in terms of the trends that they have been witnessing as well.
Thank you, and that's ongoing discussion, I presume. Thanks.
Thank you. And if you could take the chair, I just have two questions if I can. I really appreciate that you did an extrapolation of student population. I've been whining for years that a census in May and a StatsCan figure based on that census is just tremendously flawed methodology. How did you extrapolate or come up with the uncaptured census student population that you rightfully recognize is there, but how did you come about with that uplift of that number?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's important though to characterize it. It's not, I'm not sure when you said uplift if you mean an uplift relative to historical trends or just the additional layer of students. But just to be clear in terms of the context, the student population has been growing at a rate in the previous 3 census periods at over like 3% a year, and it's identified in the report those trends. Sorry, I guess just to be clear, about 3.2 and about 2.8 in the last 2 census periods. So what we did is we took a look at those historical trends. We also looked at what each of the institutions, post-secondary institutions, are projecting over the next few years based on their own enrollment data. So that gives us a little bit of a window, not very long, but about 3 years. Then we looked at the place of origin where the population is being generated from in each of the 3 institutions, and we looked at the potential future population growth rate related to the 19 to 24 category of those domestic students in Canada throughout the various places of origin that they are coming from. And then the last factor is really looking at that international factor. And so the international factor becomes obviously a harder factor to really nail down because we don't have the same real level of precision and data to nail down how fast that international component is going to grow. And we also recognize from talking to the universities that while they do want to see continued growth in the international students, there is a balance that they're looking to strive for between international and domestic. And so that last element becomes a little bit harder to gauge, but it was the final element that we layered on top to get to that overall population of just over 1% a year of enrollment.
Thank you. And my final question is somewhat related to that. One of the great blessings and great curses in Kingston is we have the highest per capita number of PhDs in the country, including the retired chief statistician for the Government of Canada. So the 0.6 vacancy rate that, and I don't question for a minute that we have a housing crisis and we need to address that vacancy rate. But I've heard from who I believe are reliable sources that that is a really flawed number, the 0.6, that in fact we may well be 1.2 or like twice that. But the methodology that's used, part of it not capturing students, part of it not capturing secondary suites, that kind of thing kind of skew downward that percentage vacancy rate. Is there any way logically that we can extrapolate and come up with a more accurate number? or are we totally reliant on CMHC, which is reliant on some of the same stats can figures?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's probably a lot more work to be done when it comes to housing and rental housing, and I know council is initiating a strategy on housing. To some extent, though, I think we are a little bit at the whim of some of this more empirical data that's capturing sort of the broader universe of rental and occupied. So just like we're to some extent at the whim of the census data, we are a little bit at the whim of the CMHC data. More work could be done. That could be done to look at surveys, more in-house type analysis. But I think it's difficult because unless you're going to sample the universe of this, the entire city, you have to be careful about the risks that you're going to run about not capturing the appropriate sample that you're ultimately trying to generate through the entire rental market. So probably not a question I can nail down for you today, and I think Lanny might want to add to that.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So a couple of comments. One is you're correct, Councillor Neal, that the CMHC numbers only capture what is considered the primary market, so 3 units or more. Secondary suites would not be part of that. And we estimate that there's probably around the same number of units available in the secondary market within Kingston. Having said that, in terms of the vacancy rate and how we compare to other communities, it's the same level of details, meaning that CMHC looks at primary market in Ottawa as well, and they look at that in Barrie and Oshawa. So we're not compared any differently. So when we look at 0.6 compared to somewhere else where they may have 3%, then we're comparing apples to apples from a CMHC perspective.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You want the chair back?
Looking to the committee again? Thank you. Seeing no more hands, are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this issue? Yes.
Paul Martin, 961 Linwood Drive. You're showing us that there's an increase in multifamily high-density units that's required, and it's increasing. Is that correct?
In terms of new growth, yes, we're seeing growth in multifamily and high density.
Okay. And then the growth of the city, my question would be to council, what do you want to see as growth?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Yeah. There are somewhat strict rules for public, and one of the rules is 5 minutes. The other rule, which you're nowhere near, and the other rule is all of your questions are gathered. Okay. And then responded to by the person giving the brief or by our staff, but there's no kind of directing questions to the committee. Okay. Sorry, sorry.
No, that's fine, Mr. Chair. So my question then through you, Mr. Chair, would be, and it may be to staff, is what does council or the municipality want to see as growth? When I'm listening to this report, it appears that we're just kind of sitting here having us go along with whatever the growth that is here at the moment is, and we kind of say, okay, well, that's what it is. And I guess my question is what are we doing as a municipality? Are we happy with this growth that's being projected? Or is this something that council sees where they want to change it?
Yeah. If that's your final question, you have no other questions, I'll be happy to.
Okay. And I got one more.
Kind of respond.
I just wondered in this study, you saw that, or you're showing us that the service sector is growing. And one of the pieces in the service sector is certainly the transportation industry. And I just wondered if you looked at that from the standpoint that there's a lot of companies that, what I'm being told, are relocating to Kingston, not necessarily the physical company, but their employees. So for example, tractor trailer drivers. There's been a lot of townhouses sold in the last year here, and they've been purchased by investors that are putting their people that are in the transportation industry in these houses. So we're halfway between Toronto and Montreal. So it turns out it's a good destination. Are these types of things taken into this study that you've done?
Yes, they are actually. We not only did we provide a forecast by the major industrial sectors of industrial, commercial, institutional, plus work at home, we also provided a detailed employment forecast by subsector. And so the warehousing and transportation sector was something we looked at. We also looked at that sector. We prepared the city's employment land strategy back in 2015, and we had a very more detailed look at the subcomponents of the industrial sectors at that point. We now have the benefit of 3 years of new data, and that sector is actually one of the fastest growing sectors in the industrial component that we looked at.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So to the question of growth, and are we happy with this growth, and are we just sitting back and waiting for it to happen? The answer is no, we're not sitting back waiting for it to happen. If we did, we would be actually probably recommending to you the lower number in terms of population growth. We have, I think, indicated all along and through this presentation and the council education that in order to achieve the base case, we do need to put more focus on the in-migration. And that included some of the work that we're doing with the workforce and migration strategy that we did start last year. We're continuing this year, and there's money and effort that's being put into this, not just from the city, but a number of other organizations. One point that I will make is obviously attracting people. We need housing. People are not obviously going to want to move somewhere they can't find somewhere to live. As committee members are aware, one of our challenge is not so much getting more approvals at this point, but it's getting the approved units into the ground and built so we can get occupancy and people can live in those units. With over 3,600 multi-residential units approved currently that could be built, that's a significant housing stock. So the faster that we can see this coming online, I think it will also help to be able to attract people if we have more options in terms of where people can live.
Thank you. And I'll say in response to that question as well, because you were directing it to council. Our last two council terms are in our strategic plan. One of the priorities was in-migration and job creation. And so we aren't just sitting back and saying, okay, these are the numbers, boo-hoo, what can we do? But we're very aggressively trying to prove this good gentleman partially wrong, because we're going to hopefully have greater growth than what's forecast. But using the data that's there today, some of it flawed, it isn't the rosiest of pictures for job growth and population growth over the next 20 years. But we're working on it. So, yes, Paige, sorry.
Thank you. And through you, just at a high level in terms of piggybacking on some of CAO Hurdle's comments, I think it's also really important that there's a recognition that we're not just looking at a low scenario, we're looking at the base case, we're looking at the interventions that the city is making on multiple fronts to attract new people, to retain people that are here. That's obviously part of the strategy and has been for a number of years. But I would also suggest that we're making fundamental shifts in the way that we think about planning the city, and that's also with the intention of trying to attract and retain new people. So it's not just about needing housing generally, but it's also about understanding trends in communities so that we can plan the city in a way that we're adapting to attract new types of people to the community. So you're going to see things related to tall and mid-rise buildings, to look at densification of our corridors, to look at new transportation strategies, to look at the vitality of our downtown, and understanding how quality of life related to environment translates into attracting and retaining new people. So it's all of these things working together in harmony to create the outcome that we want. And it's definitely not the city sitting back and waiting just to see what happens in terms of natural demographic trends. We're attacking it on multiple fronts all at the same time.
Thank you. Seeing no other members of the public with questions, I'll go back to the committee, and if somebody would like to move and second the recommendation before us. Moved by Councillor Kiley, seconded by Councillor Hutchison. All those in favor? Carried. And I apologize. I seem to have lost my agenda here. I'll just be a second getting it back up. Pardon me? Yes. Next on our agenda, I apologize, is the public participation and recommendation with recommendations. So that's item C before us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to add a couple of introductory comments while Sukriti gets set up. So this is bringing back to the committee. We were here before. We took some additional comments from the public, and we've tried to look at making some adjustments to the recommendation. This is just building on the overall continued work that the city has done over the last number of years with respect to public engagement generally, but also looking for opportunities to have greater participation within the planning process. So this is a follow-up to some work that we've already done through 2017 and 2018, and Sukriti is going to present to you, which we hope will be the final recommendation relative to some additional opportunities relative to planning applications, and we're happy to take questions.
Thank you. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sukriti Agarwal, and I'm an acting project manager with the Planning Division. Today, I'm here to present a supplementary report with regards to additional opportunities for public participation in the planning approvals process. The report recommends that the recommendation contained in a previous comprehensive report, number PC 19-004, be replaced with the following new recommendation. That it be recommended to Council that an open house event be added to the public consultation process for Complex Planning Act applications that are presented at Planning Committee meetings to be determined by Planning Division staff on a case-by-case basis, and that the open house approach for Complex Planning Act applications, as described in Exhibit A of report number PC 19030, take effect on July 1st of 2019. So PC 19030 is the supplementary report that's being presented today. Just a very brief background, as Ms. Agnew mentioned, staff have been looking at opportunities to enhance public participation process in the past couple of years. A new process was introduced in 2017, which provided members of public with an opportunity to provide oral comments at the time comprehensive reports were presented at Planning Committee meetings. Through last year, we were looking at some additional opportunities to enhance public participation in the early stages of the planning approvals process. A draft open house approach for Complex Planning Act applications was presented in September of last year, followed by a comprehensive report in December. There were several comments received at the December meeting, at which time Planning Committee deferred the recommendation and the report to allow staff some time to consider the comments received and bring back another report. This is a summary of the main public comments received. The first question we got was that how will we define a complex application? To this effect, it's not possible for staff to define exactly what a complex application would mean, just because of the nature and type of applications that are received by staff. And it also depends on the location of the proposed application. So sometimes something may not seem as significant in one part of the city, but may seem like a more complex application in a different part of the city because of locational matters. The next comment we received was as it regards to presentation materials, whether or not a formal presentation would be required at an open house, and also requesting that developers provide information as it relates to as-of-right permissions and proposed amendments and information on community benefits. So based on this feedback, staff have revised the proposed approach for open houses. We have identified what presentation materials would be required to be prepared by the applicant for the open house, including the information that's been requested. The location of the open house is proposed to be in Memorial Hall at City Hall because it's a barrier-free. It has barrier-free access, so this was one of the main considerations, and also the fact that Memorial Hall is a large facility. It can accommodate a large number of people. The timing of an open house would be after a Planning Act application has been received by the city, because the city doesn't really have the authority to require an open house before we receive an actual application. The method of receiving public comments would be in writing. It is proposed that planning staff will bring with them comment sheets, and members of the public can submit comments at the meeting to planning staff, or they can provide comments later on by email or by mail. And we've also clarified the role of staff at these open houses, which would be to provide clarity regarding the planning approval process, and also provide sign-in sheets, collect comment sheets, provide comment sheets, and also prior to the open house, provide a notice of the open house. So this is just a summary of the refined open house approach. It would be applicable only to complex Planning Act applications to be determined by staff on a case-by-case basis. The purpose of the open house would be for the applicant to improve public understanding of the application, hear comments and concerns, and provide technical clarification. The open house would be hosted by the applicant with support from city staff. The format would be an informal drop-in setting. The open house would be held where it is required on every first and Thursdays of each month prior to planning committee meetings in Memorial Hall, City Hall. This is to ensure that if planning committee members would like to participate at the open house, they do have the opportunity to do that. The applicant's responsibilities would include preparing display boards to include aspects such as the existing zoning and policy framework, the requested amendments, information about community benefits if applicable, for applications for draft plan of subdivision. The applicants would also provide information as it relates to the number of lots being created, the type of units being created. A formal presentation would be at the discretion of the applicant. Staff will be bringing with them sign-in sheets and comment sheets at the open house, and staff will also be providing a courtesy notice to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands, and include any written feedback received as a result of the open house in a future staff report. So this is a slide showing the typical planning approvals process with an open house added right about in here after staff have deemed the application complete and before a public meeting is held. So that's where we are proposing the open house to be held. Is with respect to next steps, should the recommendation of the supplementary report be endorsed by Planning Committee and by Council, effective July 1st of 2019, Planning Act applications that are presented at Planning Committee meetings may be subject to an open house depending on the complexity and nature of the application. And this concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take comments.
Thank you. I just, in consultation with the clerk, and he'll correct me if I've gotten any of this wrong, but we should be treating this as a kind of amendment to the following recommendation, which was, I think, came to us as a deferral. So we'll vote on this recommendation at the end of this process, and then we'll move right on to the next, and we'll refer to it as a recommendation as amended. Have I made myself abundantly unclear, or is that okay? Good. Thank you. So I will turn to the committee if there are any comments or questions, and I just have one or two, but go ahead. Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, high complexity of complexity, but I'm a bit concerned that there could be a perception in the public that certain projects are treated in one way or the other. Like it might be contentious that a certain project gets a public open house where another does not. And I'm wondering if there's any way that a rationale could be provided for why staff has deemed it to be a complex file in the announcement of the open house, because I think that would attenuate some of the potential problems from calling one complex and one not. So is that something that could happen, that when the open house is announced, the reason for the complexity is stated simply?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that certainly can be done, and we can also look at adding something in a future staff report as to why that application was deemed complex application.
That'd be excellent. And then related to that, is there a mechanism that members of the public could kind of petition staff to say why they think a certain application is complex and hence trigger an open house?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's recommended that staff would make that determination when we get a pre-application on that proposal, or sometimes we've seen cases where the application changes substantially between the time pre-application is held and the actual application is submitted. So staff would make that recommendation, and if we feel that this may be an application where a lot of public interest may be generated, we can certainly look into that and deem it as a complex application.
And my last question about this is the notice boards that are displayed for zoning changes. If it's known ahead of time that it would be deemed as a complex file, would there be information on that board as well about the open house, as there already is about the public meeting? But could that be another layer to let people know that there's even additional opportunity? Or is that too much information for those type of boards? I'm not sure. I'm genuinely wondering.
Right. So we do provide signage on the property as required by the Planning Act. This is in addition to the statutory requirements. But we can look into that. I'm just thinking about like the timing of the open house as it relates to the public meeting, because maybe the public meeting might be held like 2 weeks later. But we can definitely, I can make a note of this, and we can definitely look at that if signage can be provided.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Atchison, then Councillor Osanek.
Mike, I know what the proposal is, so I'm looking for a different type of answer. The question is, I don't think I have any problem with staff determining what is complex and what is not, because I can understand that there would be many different considerations of allowing that designation or not, right? Even some that we don't necessarily appreciate until we see a specific proposal, right? Or it gets changed halfway through or subject to negotiation and so on. So I'm not sure how you get around that. And I'm not sure I want to get around that. So my question is this. We have Exhibit B here from other communities. So how do they define whether they have a different types of extra meetings, like informal public information meeting, informal open house, so on, neighborhood meeting? And depending on the nature and scope of the application, good grief, right? I mean, I think most of the time we know when something is of significant public interest, because the public lets us know. Maybe we should know better, but they certainly let us know. So what I'm trying to get at is, how do other municipalities define the need for that open house? That's not really in here that I see. Maybe I've missed it. That's my first question. And then my second question, which may be connected, is a number of them allow councillors to request the open house. And what I want to know is, why not allow that? They seem to make it work. And I understand for developers that, you know, there could be vexatious open houses, right, being requested. I've not seen it on behalf of councillors here, really, to tell you the truth, anything like that. There's been differences of opinion, but not about that kind of thing. So those are my two interconnected questions, and I don't think they're answered here. Whatever criteria that allow those extra open houses, neighborhood meetings, and why not allow councillors to request it? I mean, in addition to staff saying, no, we have good reason to do this. And I don't think it's going to happen very often, I got to tell you, because as I say to people, you know, 30 or 40 applications can go by and nobody says peep, you know, and I'm talking about the councillors, not even the public. So then we have, you know, big ones.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, and Security, feel free to add. Security did a lot of the leading practice research from other municipalities, so certainly I don't think we were able to get any clear definitions of how municipalities are making that call in terms of like a formalized definition. It's true in other communities, some communities, the need for an open house is being at the request of the district councillor. And certainly from a staff perspective, we're very open to working with you. I think from our perspective, we didn't want to set up something that put the onus on the district councillor to have that responsibility. We wanted to take that on as staff, but we're happy to take input from the district councillor, from residents as well. So it's not meant to be something that we only decide in isolation. Similar to everything we do related to the planning process, public input is important, and input from the district councillor is certainly something that we value. So we want to ideally identify it through pre-application, but it's also the type of thing, as well as we educate people about the application process, that we'll have those discussions with them when formal applications are filed as well, so they understand the expectation of doing this in addition to the public meeting. So there's an opportunity for discussion And to be honest, some of the developers in the community that already have a good sense of how to engage the public are already doing this on their own. So there will be a learning curve for some, but there are a number that are already doing this. This just formalizes the requirement beyond just a voluntary piece, which is what we wanted to put in place to create. I don't know if you have some additional comments.
I just wanted to add that this will be an evolving process. We can certainly look at, once we do start having these type of open houses, if we do need to revise our approach, we will certainly look at that.
I just want to say that I think staff should be able to bring about I put it down as additional open house because we sometimes do it already, right? But just say open house. The applicant, which they would do if they're smart sometimes. I can understand why they wouldn't sometimes. Sometimes we don't even think they need to do it. And the counselor, I think it should be added in there. And here's how I suggest it would be done. We've got a situation, maybe Councilor Neal can help me out here because he's done it. We have a request for, bump up. It has to come to council. So it's not one council. I never saw it abused anyway, myself, in my opinion. It rarely happens anyway. But it comes to council, there's a vote, and either council agrees with the particular district council or they don't. And so it could work that way. So there's a bit of a filter and an opportunity because it's on the agenda for developers or people that are pro certain or anti certain things to say, vote this down, right? It's usually, and often staff is well prepared for it happening if you're talking to them at the time. So I think this has all come about because people feel, one, they're not particularly being heard, or what they say is not being reflected in the results, and we can all go into it. So I'm not actually going to go there. And that the public have reasonable input into developments that are going to directly affect their lives or the city that they live in. I think we all understand that. So I don't know if staff want to say anything else to that. But I think personally, I think the counselor should be added to those two others, the applicant and staff. And we can do it in a way that means that just you can't do it willy-nilly, right? Because I think in certain cases, the council will say no. I've never seen them do it personally, but I can certainly imagine when they would say no. So that's my sin. I don't know if I have to make a motion to that effect, because according to this chair, it sounded like I did.
If we can hear from everybody, including Councillor Sanik, who I think wanted to speak to this, we'll then open it up for public, if anybody wants to comment on this. And then when we come back and have the recommendation moved and seconded, that would probably be the best time for us to make comments and ask any further questions. So, Councillor Sanik.
Thank you. Just wanted to say thanks for putting in some flexibility as to where the open house is. So the open house will almost always be at City Hall, but it says that there is some flexibility that another city facility could be considered. So when the East End gets their new community center, maybe it could be over there. If it's a big, hot West End development, maybe it could be at the Invista Center, so where there's free parking and things for putting in that flexibility. And I see that one note we have attached at the very end of our agenda, and that's from Mr. Anderson. And I like the idea he has to have like one panel that shows what the builder can do as of right versus what they're proposing, because I know that was one thing with, like, just to say it, like the Capitol condo, right? They could always build, you know, the 6, 7, 8 stories, whatever that maximum was. It's just doing those additional stories that the entire debate was about. And I don't think everyone in the community understood that. They just saw it as, nope, they weren't allowed to build, period. And I think that would really help clear up any confusion out there for future applications. If that is possible to do, you know, under some circumstances, to request that panel.
Thank you. I will open this up to the public. If anybody wishes to make a comment, go right ahead. You're representing the whole population tonight.
I know it makes me smile a little wee bit because this is a very important topic. I guess the first question is what's the cost? We're here looking at affordable housing. We're increasing costs. We already have a public meeting that people come to and can speak like I'm doing here right now. We've got the internet. We've got a great way to communicate, and the studies and all the information that we have to put together when we do a proposal is all there, and we can push it out to everyone. Everyone has the opportunity to speak to a councillor or to city staff about the project before even the meeting comes. That's our right as a resident. I am concerned about the time factor it'll take to make more meetings. And generally, when people come to these meetings, they're there, yes, of a concern, but it's generally a lot of negativity. And at the end of the day, this council has to make the decision regardless, whether they're for or against. And I guess I look at it and I say to myself, we want to have a community where people can afford to live. And one of the things that was mentioned tonight as well, and I know staff already know this, I've got great concerns about community benefits and how community benefits are used and even how they're applied. And from what I'm understanding and listening to what's being said here, I think the guidelines are very open, I'll say. And it's going to be a scenario where if I'm a resident with a bee up my butt because someone's going to put a high-rise beside my house, I'm going to be calling my counselor all the time, and my counselor is going to make sure it gets bumped up and try to make the process as difficult as possible. And again, I go back to costs, and I guess sometimes I look at, we elected council as a group to make decisions, and they've got great staff to try to help make those decisions. And, you know, when do we end the public input? We have all kinds of it right now, and this is putting on another layer. I know I'm probably not asking the right question, I apologize, but they are great concerns is, you know, how can we, and this is my question, how can we make sure we've got affordable housing for this community? The average house price now is pushing $450,000. You're right, if I'm moving from Toronto and I've sold my house for $500,000 or for $1 million, spending $500,000 here is nothing. I've still got $500,000. But, and the reason we're seeing increased density is because of the costs associated with all the studies that we're doing, trying to develop property and put rental housing on the market. And you know, a good question Paige brought up here tonight, she says, well, there's 3,000 units that we've already approved. Well, the question to me would be, why has they not been built? Well, usually it's finances. They can't afford now to put it up. Because if you get those approvals, you know, you've come through a huge hurdle. You know, you want to get that building up. But in any case, I think if I can, again, to council is you got to take into consideration what are the costs associated with what you're asking. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Did that initiate any response from staff, or we've all heard the comment? I don't see. I think we heard the comment loud and clear. So seeing no other questions from the public, we will, pardon me? Yeah. So I'm looking for a mover and a seconder to treat this recommendation as an amendment to the final report. Yes,
Another question, point of order.
I'm sorry.
Can I ask another question, Billy?
Of course.
Interesting comment, Martin. So I have a question for staff related to the impact of open houses. And I wonder if in your preparation for this and looking at best practices, if there's any planning literature on the change in people's perception of a project before and after an open house. And the reason I ask that is because I hosted an open house in my district about 2 weeks ago, and planning staff were very generous and came to answer my residents' concerns about development on Gardner's Road. And also the developer was very generous, and the vice president of Taggart came and talked to the residents who were at the library. And I feel like the more information that they had about the project, actually the fewer people were against it. So I didn't know if that's empirically validated elsewhere or if there's case studies that have shown that. But in my experience, open houses actually allow the community to get on board with development. I'm wondering if staff could speak to that.
I don't have any empirical evidence, but certainly in terms of like mathematical statistical data, but certainly I think in the planning field generally, a lot of what the issues are communication based, and sometimes a lack of insight or understanding or education about what's happening. So oftentimes, small group meetings coupled with bigger pieces and technical reports, it's all of those things coming together that help to enrich a person's understanding of what's happening, and then also understanding where the opportunities are for them to be part of the process. So I think what we heard and what we've read from other communities as well, relative to the formalized public meeting process, not everybody desires to be in council chambers speaking into a microphone, being in front of a formalized audience, and participating in that fashion. Something like an open house may be less of a barrier to their participation, which is why we were looking at a community space that we knew was accessible, that we could offer for free and provide things in the room to make it easier. Those were all things that we were thinking about. But certainly I would agree with you. It's really about enhancing people's understanding so that they know what's happening, they know how to contribute to that, and then they also can understand how their feedback has impacted whatever the final recommendation and the decision of their district councillor or the council as a whole is. So it's really a further step in trying to offer the opportunity for that to happen in the most reasonable and fair way that staff could think about. The other thing I would offer in terms of the approach, and I'm not sure whether we really need a formalized motion from you, Councillor Hutchison, about the council involvement. All of you received the technical circulations for DASH that go through your areas. Certainly through that, you could easily comment that this is something of interest. I feel like it would be beneficial to have an open house, and that's something you're getting right from the beginning, and we could be identifying that for an applicant. Even if we hadn't through pre-application, there would still be sufficient time to schedule that open house and for us to be able to communicate that to people. So it's just an option that's available to you now based on the fact that you're already using DASH to comment on applications, and that could be one more part of the process.
I would like to get the amendment on the floor, and then we can speak freely to it, both comment and questions. So if there's a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Sanik, Councillor Kiley. So it's now on the floor. If you have comments or questions, now would be the time to ask, and I do, so.
I'll take the turn.
Okay, I've just been told this is a replacement to a recommendation, and the comments should come after this when we put the other recommendation on the floor. Don't ask me to explain that. I don't know why, but.
Similar to the report that was received at the last meeting regarding Graceland, there was a supplemental report in which the third clause was replaced by approval of a recommendation, and then the committee had an opportunity to deal with the original report and recommendation. So this is essentially an amendment to delete the deferred recommendation in its entirety and replace it with the recommendation in the supplemental report. So upon the approval of the revised recommendation, there will still be an opportunity for the committee to deliberate on the matter.
So we have it moved and seconded. So I will call the question and then we'll move on to the final recommendation, which has incorporated this. So all those in favor? Carried. So we will now go on to the next recommendation, which we should treat as amended with this additional direction. There's a mover and a second. Thank you, Councillor Asanic, Councillor Kiley. I would like to speak to it, but if anybody has questions or comments. Yes, Councillor Hutchison.
Well, I at least discussed an amendment, and I want some guidance from the committee and from staff. Here's my concern. I've sat on a number of different councils. Some of them are very open. They allow, you know, if it was a district councilor and they wanted something, it would just happen, okay? So I didn't, just so you know, I think it's staff will acknowledge, I haven't bumped up anything, ever, okay? So I don't need to, usually the public has done it for me, where it's necessary and lots of things just go through. So my concern is that the district councilor, whether at the urging of the district population or simply because they've recognized there's a potential problem, has, like in the bump up situation, the ability to at least ask council to allow for an open house. Now, part of that, so that's one thing, I think, because I don't think it can be, like, I recognize this, we have good staff, and they might even approach you and say, you know, I think that's happened with the bump up. I know that with another councillor. They approached the councillor and said, this is a candidate, or actually it was me, actually. I think this is a candidate project for a bump up, because I asked them about it, and they said, yeah, it probably is. It never happened, actually. So, and so that's good. I think that's good, and we're working together. But I think it needs to be in the rules of the procedural rules that you can do it if you feel it's necessary and part of your responsibilities as a counselor. I think if you leave it open, the opportunity can go by and you won't be able to do anything about it. The second important thing about this is there are appropriate times to have the open house and useful times to have open houses, and other times what's the, you know, not necessarily any point to it. Other people might disagree, especially in the public, but I think all of us that work our way through the procedures recognize that. So I'm looking for some guidance from staff about, you know, like what I've written is that staff would determine the time and when the open house would take place if the councillor has requested it. Because sometimes we're so far along, it's not going to change anything, right? Other times, when it might have an effect, as Ms. Agnew pointed out, it'd be really quite worthwhile for all parties. So that's, I'm trying to explain my conundrums here so that I'm not just doing this off the top of my head. One is the nature of the politics of councils. The second is the process, the development application process. And in other words, if the councillor requests it and he gets council's approval, which I think is a filter, and staff would say, okay, but it better be in the next 10 days, right? Or whatever it is, but they would determine when, or, you know, it would be better if we waited 3 weeks and then everybody will know everything and that sort of thing. That might happen anyway, because that's the way we operate, but I'm just looking for guidance here, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, maybe I can get started and Ms. Agnew may want to add to that. So I think what was being suggested or proposed through the initial approach of using dash and flagging certain applications that a councillor would like to see having an open house was to try to, one, accelerate the process and facilitate, meaning that you don't have to go through something that's procedurally more complicated. What I'd like to suggest is any councillor has the opportunity at any point in time to bring a motion and to put a motion forward requesting that there be an open house without amending the policy or the guidelines that we have in place. If it came to that point where you didn't feel that staff was being cooperative or was collaborating or wasn't necessarily listening to your concerns, as a councillor, you always have that option to bring a motion forward and provide that direction. So that's something that's within your power with the existing proposed guidelines. So rather than amending the guidelines and making that part of a procedurally maybe more complicated process for the most part, I think that you would agree that if it's something that you brought forward and asked staff to have an open house, that we would usually, I mean, I can't recall a time that we wouldn't work with a councillor to make something like that happen.
So if that were the case, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, through you, if that were the case, can that be in the procedure, in the what we're considering tonight? Just noting, like it notes, for instance, the applicant can have an open house. Well, you can't really stop them, right? So I think what you're doing is observing that they have the power to do something that was, you know, part of an open society, right? It's not something they're required to do, but they can do it, and they do it, as Councillor Kylie indicated. So if you just put it in there so that it's clear that the councillor can ask staff to do it,
Could I make
or pass a motion to do it.
If I could make a
I'd be happy with
procedural recommendation here. One, I totally agree with Councillor Hutchison. And like a bump up of site plan, I think we get that. That happens maybe twice a year. And so it isn't something that's abused. I don't think councillors are looking to create more meetings to attend. But there are times when issues come up where a bump up of site plan makes sense. So I would be more comfortable if we were to amend this with that provision here tonight, then it goes back to staff to add to it and comes back here and it delays the whole process. I would prefer if we consider, and I would support an amendment from the floor at council, and with the suggestion that staff are comfortable with this, and I think that's what I heard our acting CAO say. So if we do, it's a lot quicker and cleaner if we do it from the council floor. And then we're engaging the whole council in, if they choose, a make-work project. So are people comfortable with that idea?
Are you saying we should defer this? And so the
No, we
council-
shouldn't defer is what I'm saying. We should pass this as it is before us, and when it comes to the floor with a recommendation from this committee at council, that's where we should move an amendment and ask staff what you just asked and get the same response. So
Thinking through you, so we're happy to do that, and between the timing of this meeting and when this gets pulled forward, which would be May 8th, I think, that we could work with anyone that wants to bring an amendment when this comes to the floor to be able to add that, if that makes it cleaner. The other option I was going to suggest is that we could add a clause to the recommendation that suggests that we roll out the process as we've talked about, and then within a 6-month period, we do a review and come back to planning committee to let you know how it's working. We could look at further adjustments. I don't know if it's 6 months, if it's 12 months, just to get the process going to see. And then there could be some other things that come forward that maybe we want to make an adjustment. That's another option to consider. And that would be a fairly procedurally easy thing to do in terms of adding a clause to the recommendation, which could also be done on the floor at council as well.
Thank you. Are people comfortable with that approach?
So Chair, yeah, I think adding a clause in end would be better, so we have a report back anyway, so we can kind of assess how it's going. So I think that's a good idea. Did I understand that correctly? Add that clause for a report back at this moment, and then change it if we need to at that point?
I think what was being suggested is that anybody from this committee can work with staff so that we have an amendment that staff are comfortable with, that we can amend from the council floor when this comes on the 8th.
Okay.
Otherwise, it'll be our planning meeting in May to move this, and it would be the end of May before this got to council floor. So, accurate?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
through you, that's accurate, and we're happy, Councillor Hutchison, if it makes sense to work with you directly, because some of this came directly from some of your questions, we're happy to do that and to circulate it to the other members of the committee, just so that you're aware of what's happening before it hits the floor at council. Whatever is easiest, we can accommodate that.
That's fine with me.
Great, thank you. Would you take the chair, Mr. Vice Chair?
I recognize you.
Okay, comments. My main rant has just been taken care of, and that was the idea that councillors should have an opportunity to identify what they think, just like with a bump up. Obviously, we need to do it sparingly. I also want to just make a quick comment. Councillor Kiley is absolutely right. The 3 major projects that are now being built or about to be built on the Williamsville corridor, I organized a public meeting at the Memorial Center. The proponents for the projects quite happily came to those meetings. Senior staff came to those meetings. And the turnout through the community associations was really high. And the response, I think, was really good. And that, I think, is a model that we may still wish to follow. The one concern that I had, and I'm not going to try to tweak this motion to address it, but clearly the whole idea of this being organized by city staff, but presented and primarily by the developer could be problematic in some people's minds. I wouldn't have an issue with that, but I'm thinking about some of the contentious projects that we've had over the last few years, and that would feed into the idea that, oh, staff and council just rubber stamp developers, and now they're hosting it, letting them host an issue. I don't know how to address that other than to make sure that councillors were there to ask questions and engage, and staff were there, so it didn't just look like a developer's info ad. And that may be a little extreme, but that's a concern I have. And so, but I'm willing to wait and see how this gets operationalized. So I'm comfortable with that. I'm really happy with the changes that have been made. In 2011, we had a statutory public meeting for the Walmart in the North End. 6 years later, I believe it was, a comprehensive report landed on our, and there wasn't one member of this committee that had been at the statutory meeting, 5 or 6 years before. And that's problematic because there wasn't anybody there that could remember the public comments or concerns that were expressed. Most of them were captured in the report, but still. So, and now that we have an opportunity for the public to speak at the comprehensive recommendation stage, I think we've addressed that problem without having to add a compulsory, another statutory meeting. So, and I think this is a step in that same direction. So,
I think staff wanted to reply to
Thank
at least
you.
one of your comments.
I could just make a quick comment. Were you going to say something? Sorry. So from my point of view, I think that it's a very important step forward, and I know that there have been some concerns that were identified with respect to who's hosting the open house, who's speaking at the open house. And I think as a community, we've made a lot of strides in terms of opening up conversations and trying to increase engagement and trying to increase a sense of accountability and transparency. And I think we need to continue to push that to get rid of anything that may be lingering in terms of a anti-developer versus the public kind of tension that has existed. I know that there are reasons and people have feelings about things that have happened in the past, but these are the types of events that are important where groups can come together and facilitate conversations differently than maybe they have in the past, and I think that's some of the intention and the reason why city staff are helping to sort of hold the space. We're not doing the work for the applicant, but we're there to observe, to be present, to hear the feedback, to help capture the feedback, and to bring that into the process to help ensure that there's no sense of a biased approach to capturing feedback or not hearing certain things. So I think it's very important for this committee and for us as staff to champion that type of relationship building, and I think this is a way to do it, and I just wanted to add that in terms of some of your comments, Councillor Neal.
Acting CEO Rideau.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say a whole lot more. I know it's late. And I just want to point out part of it is also about having the applicant build better relationships with the community and the neighborhoods. Some of them have, I think, been doing great work and doing a lot of that. But if we try to remove the applicant from that process, I think we're not helping the situation in the long term. They have to build better relationship and be open to comments and looking at changes as well. And I think, Councillor Neal, the couple of examples you mentioned, the applicants were the ones presenting their project and trying to build that relationship with the neighborhood.
I can concur with that. Of those 3 public meetings that we held, there was not everybody in the community was totally pleased with the projects, but none were appealed by the community or the community association. 2 were appealed by a competitor developer to delay competition, I believe. And so that's I think I agree, there's a potential here to build some bridges. So, great.
Yield the chair to you.
Thank you. Any further comments, or can we call the question as amended or as whatever we've done to it? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. And I've lost my screen. Was that it? Thank you very much. We received some correspondence in the addendum. I believe we've all had a chance to read it. I don't believe we have any motions or notices of motion tonight? I don't believe we have any other business. And the date and time of the next meeting is May 2nd at 6:30 here at City Hall. So, everybody's favorite word. Motion to adjourn. Great. Pick the litter. There were movers and seconders all over the place. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much.